Haji itu dimulai dari niat. Yakinlah Allah memampukan. Semua berawal dari niat yang tulus. Ikhtiar penuh tawakal demi menyempurnakan ibadah. Menjawab panggilan ilahi. Karena siapapun dapat menjadi tamu Allah.
Suara toa itu terus menggema, berbarengan dengan kayuhan sepeda ontel tua. Ialah Bintoro Asmat Iskak, atau akrab disapa Pak Bin. Iya, Pak Bin tak pernah menarifkan jasanya. Meski demikian, nyatanya ia sudah 3 kali berangkat haji. Semua hasil dari kepiawaian jari jemarinya memijit.
Alhamdulillah, Allah beri sudah 3 kali. Tahun 83, terus tahun 96, terus tahun 16 kemarin.
Kini, jika Allah ridhoi, anak serta istri Pak Bin akan berangkat haji 2024 nanti.
Anakku nanti tahun 2024 7 orang. Anakku, bojoku, mantuku udah bayar semua, tinggal nunggu berangkat. Nek anakku tak kon bayar sendiri. Tiap hari kerja atau enggak kerja, buka toko atau enggak buka toko, tak kon nabung 20.000 per hari. Wah, akhirnya sebulan setor ke bank. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Ini baik kalau kamu ngomong.
Al-Hajju Ashhurun Ma'lumat.
Iya, hidup memang tak bisa ditebak. Semua bisa saja terjadi jika Allah sudah berkehendak. Pak Bin, salah satu contoh bagaimana seorang pejuang haji benar-benar Allah ridhoi ke tanah suci, bahkan tidak 1 kali. Begitulah jika Allah sudah cinta terhadap seorang umat, iman yang kuat tak akan pernah sia-sia. Semua pasti ada ganjarannya dari Allah Ta'ala.
Haji itu dimulai dari niat. Yakinlah Allah memampukan. BPKH memanggil putra-putri terbaik bangsa yang amanah.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam Bapak Ibu dan juga Sobat ISEF, kami ucapkan selamat datang di virtual platform tour dari Indonesia Syariah Economic Festival 2020. Saya Randy Wicaksana akan memandu Anda untuk mengintip canggihnya virtual platform tour dari ISEF di tahun ini. Indonesia Syariah Economic Festival atau ISEF merupakan salah satu event keuangan dan juga ekonomi syariah yang terdepan dan terbesar di Indonesia, mengintegrasikan pengembangan sektor keuangan dengan perekonomian sektor real yang dihadirkan secara istimewa, yakni secara virtual untuk Anda dimanapun Anda berada. Sobat ISEF, tour kita mulai dengan melihat sebuah bangunan yang Anda lihat saat ini di layar Anda menyerupai sebuah dom. Ini kita jadikan sebagai rumahnya ISEF untuk melangsungkan berbagai macam kegiatan ISEF di tahun ini. Yang unik dari bangunan ini adalah menggunakan motif batik kawung. Batik sendiri adalah ciri khas dari bangsa Indonesia. Motifnya yang sederhana tapi elegan menjadi salah satu ciri tersendiri yang kita harapkan akan Anda mudah ingat dari motif batik Indonesia. Selain itu, bentuk dom ini rancangannya diambil dari kubah masjid yang melambangkan rumah Islam yang menaungi seluruh kegiatan ISEF. Masya Allah, gimana keren ya? Udah canggih, keren pula. Sekarang kita lanjutkan tour dengan masuk ke welcome gate dari platform ISEF ini. Tapi sebelum saya ajak masuk, kita ajak Sobat ISEF untuk melakukan pendaftaran terlebih dahulu ya. Usai mendaftar, Anda bisa masuk ke lobby ISEF dengan terlebih dahulu memasukkan data email, password, dan kemudian klik login. Welcome to virtual platform ISEF 2020. Yang Anda lihat saat ini merupakan lobby utama dari virtual platform. Gimana? Keren kan? Yang Anda lihat di belakang saya ada sebuah layar besar bertuliskan agenda. Di sana Anda bisa melihat berbagai jadwal kegiatan dari penyelenggaraan ISEF tahun ini. Di sebelah kanan layar Anda ada social media wall yang berisikan berbagai unggahan dan juga updatean yang ditampilkan secara real time dari sosial media ISEF, baik dari Twitter, Facebook, hingga Instagram. Berikutnya akan muncul panduan navigasi untuk membantu Anda mengetahui bagaimana cara menjelajahi virtual platform ini. Lobby juga bisa Anda saksikan dari angle bird view seperti ini. Jadi semakin memudahkan Anda untuk melihat ada apa aja yang berada di area lobby. Sobat ISEF, di bawah saya ini terdapat berbagai icon yang bisa Anda gunakan selama Anda menjelajahi virtual platform ini. Di sisi paling kiri Anda terdapat sebuah icon bergambarkan rumah bertuliskan lobby yang jika Anda klik akan membawa Anda kembali ke tampilan lobby setelah Anda menjelajahi virtual platform ini. Salah satu kegiatan penting dalam penyelenggaraan ISEF 2020 ini ialah International Showcase. Sobat ISEF bisa mengunjungi 10 island. 4 diantaranya berada di area lobby.
Komite Nasional Ekonomi dan Keuangan Syariah Island,
Research and Education Island, Sustainable Fashion, Sustainable Lifestyle Island, Social Development.
Sobat ISEF, sekarang saya akan mengajak Anda untuk mengunjungi Komite Nasional Ekonomi dan Keuangan Syariah Island yang beranggotakan 15 kementerian, otoritas, dan lembaga. Komite Nasional Ekonomi dan Keuangan Syariah atau KNEKS diketuai oleh Presiden RI dan dibantu oleh Wakil Presiden RI sebagai Wakil Ketua selaku Ketua Harian. Merupakan sebuah lembaga non-struktural yang bersifat independen dalam pelaksanaan tugas dan fungsi wadah kolaborasi, beranggotakan 3 Menteri Koordinator, 7 Menteri, Ketua Dewan Komisioner OJK, Gubernur Bank Indonesia, Ketua Dewan Komisioner LPS, Ketua Umum MUI, dan Ketua Umum Kadin, dengan Menteri Keuangan merangkap sebagai sekretaris yang bersama-sama bersinergi mendorong pengembangan ekonomi dan keuangan syariah nasional untuk mewujudkan visi Indonesia sebagai pusat ekonomi dan keuangan syariah dunia. Island ini akan menampilkan informasi berbagai program, kebijakan, dan berbagai macam produk yang diinisiasi, dicanangkan, serta telah diimplementasikan oleh seluruh anggota Komite Nasional Ekonomi dan Keuangan Syariah.
Setelah puas melihat island, sekarang saya mau ajak Anda untuk menikmati fashion show. Fashion show sendiri akan dimulai dari tanggal 28 hingga 30 Oktober 2020 yang akan menampilkan beragam karya busana muslim dari perancang busana kenamaan dan keren. Untuk berpartisipasi dalam kegiatan internasional dan domestik webinar sesuai dengan minat Anda hanya tinggal klik button International and Domestic Webinar. Kegiatan ini sudah berlangsung sejak Agustus 2020. Selain itu, juga ada kegiatan talk show. Kemudian juga ada business coaching, workshop, business matching, dan one-on-one meeting. Jangan takut ketinggalan, karena Anda bisa kembali menyaksikan semua rangkaian acara kami di platform ISEF 2020 ini. Di exhibition hall ini, Anda bisa menemukan beragam jenis produk unggulan yang tersebar di 10 island yang berbeda, mulai dari Healthy and Organic Food Island, Sustainable Fashion Island, Islamic Boarding School Island, ada juga Islamic Commercial Finance Island, Islamic Social Finance Island, ada juga Coffee and Tea Island. Kemudian Agriculture, Herbs and Spices Island, Muslim Friendly Tourism Island, dan juga ada Ethnic, Craft and Cosmetics Island, Temukan juga beragam jenis produk lainnya di other sectors island. Sekarang kita coba masuk ke salah satu island. Kita masuk ke Healthy and Organic Food Island. Di sini sudah ada contoh beberapa display makanannya. Bisa kita lihat ada rendang dan gudeg dan juga abon serta dendeng. Kalau misalnya Anda berminat melihat gudeg dan rendang, tinggal klik. Nah, di sini bisa langsung melihat berbagai informasinya termasuk link untuk ke e-commerce-nya langsung. Jadi bisa langsung berbelanja. Masya Allah. Jangan lupa, di ISEF 2020 juga terdapat berbagai hadiah menarik, termasuk e-voucher dan juga souvenir untuk Anda. Meski sudah puas berbelanja di Exhibition Hall, jangan lupa bahwa di tanggal 28 Oktober 2020 nanti akan dilaksanakan opening ceremony. Anda tinggal klik button opening ceremony dan hadir di tanggal tersebut yang insya Allah juga akan dibuka secara resmi oleh Presiden Republik Indonesia. Wah, tidak terasa Sobat ISEF, kita sudah sampai ke penghujung dari virtual platform tour. Tapi ingat, ini baru sebagian. Bahwa pandemi COVID-19 yang melanda Indonesia dan dunia bukanlah akhir segalanya. Justru, ini munculkan peluang baru, lahirkan karya dan inovasi. Menyatukan jarak dalam dunia maya bukan lagi hal yang tidak mungkin. Virtual tidak lagi hanya dirasakan di film saja. Tapi kini, di hadapan Anda, virtual terasa nyata. Salam sehat untuk Sobat ISEF semua. Sekarang kita kembali ke acara.
Dalam rangka mendorong pengembangan ekonomi syariah, Bank Indonesia bersama kementerian dan otoritas yang tergabung dalam Komite Nasional Ekonomi dan Keuangan Syariah, serta berbagai stakeholders ekonomi dan keuangan syariah, kembali menyelenggarakan ISEF ke-7. Pandemi COVID-19 memberikan dampak yang sangat luas, tidak hanya krisis kesehatan, namun menyentuh berbagai sisi sektor kehidupan, termasuk sektor ekonomi yang terdampak luas. Untuk meminimalisir hal tersebut, berbagai usaha dan kolaborasi telah dilakukan oleh pemerintah dan berbagai lembaga negara. Hal tersebut dilakukan melalui penyesuaian anggaran belanja di berbagai sektor dan penerbitan kebijakan bauran lainnya untuk memperkuat stimulus ekonomi. Penguatan kelembagaan juga dilakukan oleh pemerintah untuk mendorong ekonomi dan keuangan syariah melalui perubahan fungsi KNKS menjadi KNEKS agar pengembangan sektor keuangan syariah juga dapat dilakukan beriringan dengan pengembangan ekonominya. Koordinasi di antara kementerian dan lembaga terus ditingkatkan agar kebijakan yang ditempuh bisa memberikan dampak positif yang sesuai dengan kondisi di lapangan. Dunia pesantren dan berbagai penggiat usaha syariah berikhtiar dengan inovasi melalui penerapan usaha berbasis protokol COVID-19, mendorong produk ketahanan pangan, dan mengembangkan renewable energy. Pemasaran berbasis teknologi digital dilakukan agar penyediaan produk halal dapat dipasarkan secara luas dengan harga terjangkau. Ekosistem keuangan syariah dikembangkan melalui berbagai penerbitan produk keuangan syariah seperti cash wakaf link sukuk, bank wakaf mikro, dan realisasi kur. Pada keuangan sosial syariah masyarakat secara berbondong-bondong menyalurkan zakat, infak, sedekah, dan wakaf atau ziswaf untuk membantu masyarakat yang kekurangan. Seluruh hal ini dilakukan agar manfaat pengembangan ekonomi dan keuangan syariah dapat dirasakan oleh seluruh komponen ekonomi bangsa. Ikhtiar demi ikhtiar terus digelorakan oleh seluruh elemen bangsa. Kebijakan yang adaptif, inovasi pada sektor usaha dan keuangan syariah memberikan kita semangat untuk terus bekerja sama dalam kebaikan. Dalam rangka mengoptimalisasi dampak positif kerjasama yang telah dibangun oleh seluruh pemangku kepentingan, Bank Indonesia bersama dengan KNEKS menciptakan sebuah platform terintegrasi, yaitu Indonesia Syariah Economic Festival atau ISEF dan Festival Ekonomi Syariah atau FESYAR yang dapat mengakomodir terbentuknya silaturahim yang erat di antara regulator, profesional, pelaku usaha syariah, unit usaha pesantren, korporasi domestik dan internasional, komunitas masyarakat, dan akademisi. Diharapkan dengan bertemunya seluruh komponen tersebut, tujuan menjadikan Indonesia sebagai salah satu pusat ekonomi dan keuangan syariah dunia dapat terwujud. Saat ini, ISEF telah memasuki penyelenggaraannya yang ketujuh, yang telah berhasil meraih pencapaian positif pada bidang ekonomi dan keuangan syariah Indonesia, terhubungnya pelaku usaha syariah dengan investor, dan peningkatan literasi masyarakat. Mulai tahun 2017, ISEF selalu diawali dengan kegiatan festiar di 3 daerah, Sumatera, Jawa, dan Timur Indonesia. Pelaksanaan ISEF dan Festiar kali ini dilakukan dengan konsep yang berbeda dari tahun-tahun sebelumnya, yaitu menggunakan format virtual. Rangkaian ISEF 2020 akan mulai dilaksanakan pada bulan Agustus dan puncaknya pada bulan Oktober 2020. Mari melangkah bersama ISEF 2020 menjadikan Indonesia sebagai pusat ekonomi dan keuangan syariah dunia.
Haji itu dimulai dari niat. Yakinlah, Allah memampukan. Semua berawal dari niat yang tulus. Ikhtiar penuh tawakal demi menyempurnakan ibadah. Menjawab panggilan ilahi. Karena siapapun dapat menjadi tamu Allah.
Suara toa itu terus menggema, berbarengan dengan kayuhan sepeda ontel tua. Ialah Bintoro Asmat Iskak, atau akrab disapa Pak Bin. Iya, Pak Bin tak pernah menarifkan jasanya. Meski demikian, nyatanya ia sudah 3 kali berangkat haji. Semua hasil dari kepiawaian jari jemarinya memijit.
Alhamdulillah, Allah beri sudah 3 kali. Tahun 83, terus tahun 96, terus tahun 16 kemarin.
Kini, jika Allah ridhoi, anak serta istri Pak Bin akan berangkat haji 2024 nanti.
Anakku nanti tahun 2024 7 orang. Anakku, bojoku, mantuku udah bayar semua, tinggal nunggu berangkat. Nek anakku tak kon bayar sendiri. Tiap hari kerja atau enggak kerja, buka toko atau enggak buka toko, tak kon nabung 20.000 per hari. Aku akhirnya sebulan setor ke bank. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Al-Hajju Ashhurum Ma'lumat.
Iya, hidup memang tak bisa ditebak. Semua bisa saja terjadi jika Allah sudah berkehendak. Pak Bin, salah satu contoh bagaimana seorang pejuang haji benar-benar Allah ridhoi ke tanah suci, bahkan tidak satu kali. Begitulah jika Allah sudah cinta terhadap seorang umat. Iman yang kuat tak akan pernah sia-sia. Semua pasti ada ganjarannya dari Allah Ta'ala.
Haji itu dimulai dari niat. Yakinlah Allah memampukan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second day Tuesday event of the Delivery Serial Caliber Festival 2020. Islamic and Museum. Trying to live up and follow candidates to most investor opportunities to attain the economic excellence. My name is Dr. Jawan. Good morning and welcome. The Honorable Chairman President Dewan Perwakilan Rakyat Republik Indonesia, the Honorable Governor of Bank Indonesia, the Honorable Presiden Republik Gubernur and His Representatives, the Honorable Investors and Middle Institutions, Southeast Asia, as well as America and Europe. The Honorable CEO and Members to the National Board of Badan Pengelola Keuangan Haji, and Anggota External Board of Badan Pengelola Keuangan Haji, and Grassroots Board of Lembaga Pengelola Keuangan. Diterima oleh Kementerian Director of Philippine National Economic Keuangan Syariah, Direktur Lembaga Pengelola Perbankan Indonesia, Kepada Direktur Keputusan Detik Otoritas Jasa Keuangan, diberi oleh Presiden Melaku Administratif dan Sekretariat Sekretariat Representatif International Parliament, Representatif and moderators. Ladies and gentlemen, the final debate on the event for today will include a video program of Badan Pengelola Haji.
Indonesia, as a country with the largest Muslim population in the world, has registered more than 200,000 pilgrims applicants since 2017. The quota set by the government of Saudi Arabia and other countries includes in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation is still not yet comparable to the growth of Hajj registrants, so that the waiting period for Hajj in Indonesia average 18 to 19 years. Here the moment where BPKH is present to be the engine that drives the economy and Sharia financial industry.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to the 7th International Sharia Economic Festival 2020. We are delighted to host this international event in conjunction with the Central Bank Indonesia. BPKH, the Indonesian Hajj Funds Management Agency, is hosting the International Hajj Conference entitled Global Hajj Fund Future and Challenges. We look forward to have an active participant from Muslim brothers and sisters all over the world. We look forward to seeing you. May Allah bless you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
BPKH, or the Hajj Fund Management Agency, is the institution established by the government since 2017, who is in charge of managing Hajj Fund that includes revenue, development, expenditure, and financial accountability for Hajj. The fund management carried out by BPKH is based on Sharia principle, prudence, benefits, non-profit, transparency, and accountability. Together with BPKH, we hope that professional and accountable Hajj fund management can improve the quality of the Hajj pilgrimage.
Semoga semuanya ini memberikan maslahat bagi kita dan umat Islam.
Hope you will enjoy the event and thank you for being with us.
Mari merencanakan haji selagi muda. Mari mendaftar haji selagi muda. Ayo haji muda. Haji muda itu keren.
BPKH, a trusted financial institution, providing optimum return for the Hajj pilgrims and benefits for the Ummah.
Ladies and gentlemen, most important, let me welcome rejoicing as we have visited the Republic, National Republic, to the hospital discussion as well as the Republic, global impact on the Islamic independence. This is rejoicing is currently the national representative of the Islamic Republic Group in Indonesia.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Very good morning to you all. Thank you very much, Ibu Putri, for the introduction, and let me thank the organizers, as I have the floor, on behalf of the Islamic Development Bank Group, for inviting me to moderate this landmark event and assigning the ISDB Group to be a partner in this organization. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the first session of this International Islamic Investment Forum will be under the theme Global Outlook on the Islamic Economy and Finance. And to set the stage for the discussion, we have 4 distinguished speakers joining us today from the different corners of the globe. As introduced by Ibu Putri, we have Mr. James Walsh, the IMF resident representative in Jakarta office. He's joining us from Washington. So it's not good morning, it's good evening, Mr. James, to you. We have Ibu Riza Utami, Director, Monetary Policy Department, Bank Indonesia. Ms. Dwi Irianti, Director of Sharia Financing, Ministry of Finance, Indonesia. And we have Mr. Muhammad Ali Tawfiq, HSBC MENAT office, who is based in the United Arab Emirates and joining us from Dubai today. For housekeeping purposes, we'll be giving the floor to the four speakers in turn, and then we will be having a Q&A session at the end of this first session, before, of course, we wrap up. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, while starting, within just about a decade, our global economy has been hit by two major crises, the global financial crisis of 2008-2009, and the global pandemic crisis that began in 2019 and is still ongoing. The global financial crisis, as we know, had risen out of the actions of market players, bankers, and speculators. Their actions led to excessive buildup of debt and the risk-taking, resulting in the largest credit bubble in history. The global pandemic crisis, in contrast, is due to exogenous factors. These factors have hit the real economy directly, whereas the global financial crisis had primarily hit the financial systems. They have induced a downturn and the contraction of global economy expected to be about 5% during 2020. The COVID-19 crisis has hit us at a time when many countries, unfortunately, are still suffering from anemic growth and sluggish demand due to the global financial crisis. At the same time, and maybe on a more positive note, it is important to note that such downturns emanating from exogenous factors like tsunamis, famine, and pandemic tend on average to have less impact and stay shorter than those emanating from the financial system. Well, maybe this is a good point to give the floor to our first speaker, Mr. James Walsh. As you may be aware, Mr. Walsh has been appointed in August 2020 to lead the IMF office in Indonesia. Before that, he was an advisor in the Monetary and Capital Markets Department and has coordinated the department's surveillance program, monitoring, and technical assistance work in the Western Hemisphere. He has led financial sector stability assessments for Azerbaijan, Algeria, and as well has been deputy chief for China. His analytical work has covered financial regulatory reform, macro financial linkages, inflation, financing, infrastructure investment, and systemic financial risk, and he was co-editor of a book on Asian financial systems. He also worked in the IMF's policy design department, assessing the IMF's surveillance of developing economies. Mr. Walsh has a PhD in economics from the University of Chicago and a BA in economics from the University of Pennsylvania. Jim, good evening to you and good morning to everybody. You have the floor. So what can you tell us within 10 to 15 minutes before we go to few questions? Jim, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and also thank you very much to Bank Indonesia and BPKH for organizing this conference. I look forward to hearing what the other speakers are going to say and the general outlook for Islamic finance in Indonesia. For my remarks, I will be talking about how the IMF sees the global outlook at the moment and how we see the outlook in Indonesia at a very broad level. And I think Bank Indonesia will be presenting after I do, and Bu Riza will go into more detail about how Indonesia is expected to do in the coming months. So if we could start my presentation, please.
Please.
So the next slide. So I'll talk first about the global outlook and also some Asia-specific issues, and then some very brief points on Indonesia and how the IMF thinks that the Indonesian economy can best be prepared going forward for strong and robust growth. So next, please. So as I think we all know, the response to the coronavirus pandemic in the US, globally, led to lockdowns that slowed down economic growth around the world at the beginning of this year. As those lockdowns began to be lifted toward the end of the second quarter, we did begin to see some recovery around the world. This recovery was particularly strong in China, which led the world first enter in the severity of the pandemic, but then also in its recovery. Lockdowns in China began to be lifted in February, while in Europe and the US, it was much later. This outlook seemed quite positive over the summer, especially in Europe, as cases declined. But with cases rising quickly again in Europe and in the US, there's a great deal of uncertainty, and we're not sure what will happen. I think the main conclusion that we would draw from this is any global recovery from the slowdown related to the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to be quite slow at the global level. Next slide, please. As I said, the cases continue to rise around the world, and this continued rise, particularly in the US, where it's been going on for quite a long time, but especially more recently in Europe, has really affected financial markets in the sense that it makes people wonder to what extent the pandemic can be controlled before there's full deployment of a vaccine, and it's affecting growth expectations around the world. So the fact that lockdowns are now rising in Europe again has caused people to wonder to what extent the recovery that we began to see in advanced economies over the summer is sustainable. Meanwhile, in the US, cases remain high. The US never really came out of the first wave, and now it's entering a third one. So in the United States, there has been some recovery, but with the number of cases high, a new normal is a long way off. And finally, in Asia, while China has recovered relatively strongly, the situation in India and in Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, is quite uncertain. So next slide, please. So what the IMF sees this year is a sustained decline in the global economy of about 4.4%. We think that the decline will be stronger in the advanced economies than in emerging market economies. And in particular, we think that the euro area will be very strongly affected this year with a decline of over 8% of GDP. In the US, the decline should be less, and in Japan, it'll be somewhere in the middle. At the same time, we do expect the Chinese economy to grow not strongly this year by the standards of China, but certainly compared to the advanced economies, growth of 1.9% seems quite strong. Within ASEAN, we expect a decline of a little more than 3% of GDP, but in Indonesia, we think it will be less than that. The fund is forecasting a recovery for 2021. We expect that social distancing measures and perhaps also a vaccine mean that the economies around the world should begin to return to normal in the second half of next year. In the advanced economies, we expect that there will be a rebound of growth of about 4%. In the emerging markets, it should be closer to 6%, where there's higher potential growth. In ASEAN, we think 6.2% on average, and Indonesia at about the same level. I recognize that we are a little more optimistic than some others, and I expect that will come up in the question and answer session, and I'm happy to discuss where that number comes from. So next slide, please. The biggest impact so far that we've seen, in this case, I'd like to talk a little bit about some different components of growth that the fund is particularly concerned about. So a really big impact that we see is on trade. The global fall in trade this year has been comparable to what we saw during the global financial crisis in 2008. We do expect that there will be a relatively strong recovery next year, particularly in Asia, where in many countries the pandemic has been less severe than it's been in Europe or the US or Latin America. On the other hand, we do expect that things will be a little slower than they might have been in the past. So on the right, you can see that, for example, for Indonesia, this year we expect a decline in the total volume of trade of between 10 and 15%. And the recovery we expect next year will be on the order of about, about 20%. We do expect a strong recovery next year in Indonesia. I was confusing my signs here with Hong Kong. But the bottom line on trade is that it took quite a while for trade to return to normal after the global financial crisis in 2008. We do expect the recovery will be a little faster this time around, particularly in Asia. Part of that is because of the Chinese economy recovering so strongly. So next slide. Two other risks to that outlook, especially on trade, are relations between the United States and China and tourism. So to talk about China, we are concerned that if there's a continued disruption of trade between the United States and China, and that the two countries continue to have high tariffs on each other, this will put a lot of the global integration that we've seen in the last 10 to 20 years in reverse, and reduce the aggregate size of growth around, or aggregate level of growth around the world. So that's a big concern we have. We would hope that both China and the US can return to the negotiation table and come up with an agreement that is beneficial both to their countries and to the rest of the world, as these are the two largest economies in the world and the main export markets for almost every country on earth. Another concern is tourism. As is clear in Indonesia, as well as in many other countries, tourist arrivals have fallen very dramatically this year across Asia. We think about 60% overall. We do hope that will recover next year, but this is an area that's highly uncertain because not only do we have disruptions from people who are concerned about travel, but we have disruptions about whether people can obtain visas, whether travel is possible, and even the fact that airlines may be overly indebted and are no longer able to borrow or to have flights. And the same will also apply to hotels and restaurants. So in countries where tourism is an important component of GDP, and that is to some extent true, certainly in some regions in Indonesia, we would be concerned about growth next year. So next slide, please. On the other hand, inflation has remained under control in most countries. So what we saw during the beginning of the pandemic was that in advanced economies, while a lot of things were shut down and the supply in the economy was heavily constrained, demand fell faster than supply. So overall, we didn't see a lot of inflation. And now, even as economies are beginning to recover and still in this highly uncertain and very slow way, inflation remains under control. In emerging markets, the fall in inflation tended to be less severe than in the advanced economies, but it is now returning to normal. In the case of Indonesia, we feel that inflation expectations have been under control. The policy framework set out by Bank Indonesia has really anchored inflation expectations, and inflation now is a little bit below the band that the central bank is targeting, but overall we feel that inflation remains well under control, certainly in Indonesia. So next slide, please. Financial conditions in the global financial markets are another concern. At the beginning of the financial crisis that accompanied the outbreak of the pandemic, we did see a big increase in government bond yields across most emerging markets. However, that in countries like Indonesia, that was related both to risk aversion rising as investors became concerned about higher risk investments, and also as investors began to pull money out of emerging markets and back into their home markets. So that did see a big increase in Indonesian interest rates at the beginning of the crisis. That has subsequently reversed as markets have calmed down and recognized that there's not going to be the kind of massive financial dislocation that we saw in 2008. And at the moment in Indonesia, despite the fact that the budget deficit is relatively wide, certainly compared to previous years, Indonesian bond yields are not that different from where they were at the beginning of this year. So that's true in a lot of emerging markets, and in some emerging markets, they're even lower. But the bottom line here is that around the world, we might have expected that interest rates would rise dramatically as budget deficits have risen, as countries have tried to support the economy. But that hasn't happened. We've still seen interest rates very, very low in Europe and the United States and Japan, and even in emerging markets where we might have expected some large increase in rates. that has really not happened even at the longer end of the yield curve. So next slide, please. One concern we have about the outlook in a lot of emerging markets is that, and also in advanced economies to be fair, is that companies are borrowing a lot of money just to keep themselves in business over the course of the pandemic. So we've seen profitability fall dramatically in most emerging markets since the beginning of the financial crisis. So as you can see in Indonesia, the profitability has fallen more as a result of the coronavirus-related decline in economic activity than it did during the global financial crisis. And this is true in a lot of Asian countries. We are also concerned that the amount of indebtedness that companies are taking on could lead to a drag on economies going forward. So as you can see on the right, Indonesia has relatively high levels of corporate indebtedness already in a lot of the larger corporations, and that could be a drag going forward in investment and slow down a future recovery. So, next slide, please. And just to kind of reiterate what I said about interest rates, capital flows in most emerging markets were highly negative in the first quarter as risk aversion rose around the world and people in the advanced economies began to withdraw their investments from emerging markets. In Indonesia, that took the effect of a big decline in foreign ownership of government bonds. But this happened it was a concerted phenomenon around the world. So in Brazil, there were sell-offs in equity markets. In India, it was similar. South Korea as well. So what we see here is that there really was a sustained withdrawal, not just in Indonesia, but globally from emerging markets. And then the first quarter, and then that seems to have reversed to some extent in the second quarter. And while in China, there are now very large capital inflows as risk aversion has fallen and as the Chinese economy has recovered, even in other emerging markets, we are now seeing a more modest revival of activity. And in Indonesia, for example, in the second quarter, capital flows were positive again as investors are beginning to come back. And then next slide, please. So the concerns we would have about this going forward are twofold. Well, at least these are two important ones. The first is that while economies haven't recovered fully, stock markets have recovered very strongly in a lot of countries. This is very true in the United States, and it's less true outside the US. But as you can see on the left, there was a big decline in stock markets at the end of the first quarter as concerns about the COVID-19 pandemic took hold. But subsequently, stock markets have recovered. In the US, they're now close to where they were at the beginning of the year, or maybe a bit above it. Europe is a little behind. This exuberance about stock markets has been less in the emerging market economies, but it has happened in the emerging markets as well. So there is a concern that if growth outlook or profitability outlook deteriorate next year, then these stock market valuations could be seen as overpriced, and then we might have an adjustment. And on the right, the other concern we have is how to think about the uncertainty around the world. So the IMF has these estimates where we try to think about how much uncertainty is there about global growth, about the pandemic, or about trade. And all of these measures of uncertainty are at very high levels now. And what that means is that a small bit of news can have a major impact on pricing. And our concern would be that if there's a bit of bad news or if the global outlook changes in a small way, that could have a major impact on interest rates, exchange rates, and equities around the world. Uncertainty levels are just quite high. And that means that the outlook for financial markets is very fragile. So next slide, please. And I'll talk very briefly here about the outlook for Indonesia before Bu Riza takes over. But next slide, please. So we do expect that the IMF expects that the economy in Indonesia will recover next year and inflation will remain under control. We feel that for example, on the left, we have some indicators of investment, truck sales, and cement sales. We feel those bottomed out this year and that there should be some recovery next year. We also believe that inflation has so far remained under control. The core inflation index is a little bit outside of the target band right now. We see that in a lot of countries, and it's not unusual that that's happening in Indonesia. We feel that there's plenty of room for the economy to grow and rise back to potential. We'll have to see whether that happens. A lot of that will depend on the progress of the pandemic itself. but certainly inflation pressures are not a big concern right now. And it does seem that growth, at least for the time being, has bottomed out. Next slide, please. And financial conditions in Indonesia seem to be relatively easy right now. There's been a depreciation of the currency, but overall interest rates haven't risen dramatically during this crisis the way they have in previous crises. But credit growth remains relatively slow, despite some efforts to try to reinvigorate credit growth, and NPLs are rising. One concern we have is that the holdings of bonds by banks have risen. Part of this is because of concerns about liquidity and rules on liquidity, and part of it is because of the larger budget deficit being run by the government. I think the main concerns we have going forward about financial conditions in Indonesia, and this will affect the market for Islamic finance as much as the market for non-Islamic finance, is that interest rates in advanced economies are likely to remain low for a long time. And what we've seen from that for the last 10 years is that this tends to push up asset prices and equity prices, and it tends to lead to capital flows into emerging markets. We expect that will return in Indonesia and in other emerging markets. And to the extent that the mix of financial assets that foreign investors are looking for includes Sharia compliant assets, then we can expect conditions for those assets and demand for those assets to rise as well. So the final slide, please. So just to summarize, in 2021, we do believe that growth will recover and inflation will remain under control. We are a little concerned that the budget deficit is large. That's happening everywhere. The fund recognizes that everybody's priority around the world at this point is health funding. That's fine, and tax revenues are going to decline. Eventually, all governments will have to return to their deficit targets. That'll be true in Indonesia, but that doesn't mean it's easy. In Indonesia, we are concerned that there's social needs, and we would hope that revenue collections can increase to make sure that those social needs can be met through fiscal spending. And just a point on the omnibus law, we're curious to see what the final text of the law would be. We do think that there are some restrictions that the law would address that are holding back growth, but we would like to see how implementation and regulation will work and what the effect will be on the physical environment in Indonesia, and also on the progress of just regulation of industry in general. So that's my presentation, and I pass it back to our MC.
Thank you. Thank you very much, James. Maybe a quick question starting from this last slide. You've indicated quite strong growth forecasts for 2021, both globally and then a stronger one for Indonesia. This is of course nice to hear, but could you elaborate please on the factors driving this bullish view, please?
So I should say first that our assumptions are based on an expectation that social distancing measures will begin to be lifted around the world in the second half of next year. That may be because of a vaccine, or maybe because the pandemic is under control. That's, however, highly uncertain, and we can't be sure that will happen. So assuming that does happen, what we would expect is that there will be a return to trend levels of growth in the large advanced economies in the US, Europe, and Japan. In particular, in the US, which is large and has a higher rate of trend growth, we would expect that will boost the global economy a bit. China, we also expect to recover quite strongly. It's already a V-shaped recovery in China. We expect that to continue next year as well. In Indonesia, I'm aware that our forecast is a little higher than some other agencies. On our team, I think the way we look at it is that if the pandemic is under control next year, we should see a return to trend levels of growth. And the growth in Q1 and Q2 this year in Indonesia was very low. So we do think there will be something of a base effect, and that a return to more normal levels of growth next year, compared to a very low level of growth this year, means that there should be quite a strong recovery next year. So we're not expecting a huge investment boom or a huge consumption boom in Indonesia. We do think growth will be relatively well balanced next year. But given that the outturn this year has been relatively poor, we think it should be, the numbers as they come out should be pretty strong. We certainly hope they will be.
Great, inshallah. Well, I mean, you've mentioned about there is a lot of uncertainty of how the pandemic will evolve. Maybe, I mean, are there any recommendations on the factors that can help accelerate the economic recovery, even while the number of cases are still rising?
So one of the pieces of research that's come out of the fund, and I think other people have found similar results around the world, is that the best way to strengthen growth in this very uncertain environment is to reassure people that their health is being taken care of, and to make sure that people feel that the environment for the economy is stable. So the most important thing is to bring the pandemic under control, and to make sure that people have adequate access to healthcare and adequate levels of transmission that would allow economic activity to return. I think that's the main lesson that China shows us, is they brought the pandemic under control very quickly, and that allowed growth to return because consumers and companies were relatively confident about that. At the same time, stimulus programs have really helped in China and elsewhere. Ideally, those stimulus programs should be focused either on social spending that will help people, health spending in particular, but even income support as well, particularly for informal workers, or in areas that are going to strengthen growth in the future, such as infrastructure spending. I think those are the two main policy areas that I would point out. The need to rebuild confidence by having a handle on the pandemic, and by focusing social spending and focusing stimulus spending in areas that are of social benefit or of long-term growth benefit.
Thank you very much, James. Maybe before we pass to our second speaker, there is a question from Johari Ali Abdullah addressed to you. He's asking, is there a risk that the COVID crisis will persist? Well, that requires more doctors than economists, I guess. However, resulting in real solvency problems for major sectors, which governments and central banks cannot solve. How do you balance shutdowns with economic survival? Very good question.
I mean, I'm not an epidemiologist, but I feel like all of my friends have become epidemiologists in the last 6 months. And
yes, we all did.
In terms of thinking about solvency, I think the main way we would think about this is by saying that we should expect that profitability is going to fall, that there's going to be bankruptcies, and that there's going to be companies that fail. What we have to do, the most we can do as policymakers, is provide well-targeted stimulus that supports growth, especially in a way that makes sure that growth is inclusive, and by not concealing the problems that we do have. So, for example, in many countries, including Indonesia, we have some level of flexibility right now on how loans can be repaid to banks. And going forward, that flexibility is important to make sure that companies can get through this difficult period. But we want to make sure that that does not result in a position where the credit worthiness of banks is uncertain. So in that case, we want to make sure that financial supervisors understand where the risks are in the financial system. We want to make sure that companies' balance sheets are transparent and we know what the risks are for them. And we want to make sure that governments are spending in areas that will help.
Thank you very much, James. We took half of hour of yours. However, we'll let you rest a little bit before we come back to you in the wrap-up session. Our second speaker, Ms. Riza Utami. Ms. Riza has joined Bank Indonesia in 1996 and started her career in the accounting department. She received her master's degree in economics from the University of Birmingham, the UK in 2002. Currently, Mrs. Riza serves as the head of macroeconomic group in the Economic and Monetary Policy Department. Prior to this position, she was the deputy director of the External Assessment and Exchange Rate Division in the same department. Following her last assignment as the deputy director of the Balance of Payments Group in Statistics Department. So, Ms. Riza, Ibu Riza, I think you are the best candidate maybe to dwell more on the outlook, focusing on Indonesia. So I'll give you the floor, please, for 10 minutes. We have to be a little bit strict on the time to save time for the remaining speakers. So please, in 10 minutes, what can you tell us? You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Salah, for the introduction. And good morning, resource persons and participants. Continuing Mr. Walsh, in this session, I will elaborate the impact of global rebound on our domestic economy recovery. Presentation, please. Okay. May I start directly into slide 3. In line with Mr. Walsh, we can see some indicators showing that the global economy recovery is proceeding as expected. The rebound of global is on the back of extraordinary fiscal stimuli in several advanced economies. And the recent also gains have been boosted by economic recovery in China in response to large fiscal stimuli also, particularly in investment and a flattening of COVID-19 curve. In slide 4, it shows that the positive impact of global recovery to international trade activity. Next slide, please. Trade volume and commodity prices increase. The improvement in prices for Indonesia's main export commodities was mainly driven by higher prices for palm oil and metal. This is in line with increasing demand from China. And next, with the higher global demand, primarily from the US and China, next slide please, Indonesia export performance improved and support economic recovery. On the bottom left chart, we can see that iron and steel's export to China increased. We don't have the chart here, but I want to say the increase also recorded for pulp and waste papers as well as textile and textile products. Next, please. Endowed with export commodities, several regions outside Java recorded economic gains. In slide 6, we can see some regions started to record positive growth of export. The green color in Sumatra, Bali, Nusa Tenggara, Sulawesi, and Papua shows the positive growth in export in August. Export from Sulawesi, Papua, and Java improved on the back of demand from China. The stronger export combined with fiscal stimuli drive the gradual recovery of domestic economy. So in slide 7, August and September 2020 reveal higher government spending given the fiscal stimuli relating to social protections and small medium enterprises as support. These positive developments are reflected in a number of early indicators, including retail and online sales, that shows on figures on the bottom chart in the middle. From external sectors, slide 8, shows that trade balance surplus continues. In September 2020, trade balance maintained a 2.4 billion US dollar surplus, higher from 2.35 billion US dollar surplus on previous months. A narrower current account deficit is expected as exports continue to gain momentum, while imports are still lower due to compressed domestic demand. The surplus of trade balance support Indonesia's balance of payment remains solid. The solid performance of balance of payments also supported by foreign capital inflows, which were gradually increased in October 2020. In slide 9, the overall balance of payment is expected to record a surplus in the third quarter of 2020, despite a net outflow of foreign portfolio investment on the back potential surplus on both current account and financial account. Foreign capital inflows were gradually returning to domestic financial market. Bank Indonesia projects a low current account deficit below 1.5% of GDP in 2020, reinforcing external sector resilience. Next slide shows that amid higher financial market uncertainty stemming from global and domestic factors, rupiah remains stable, supported by Bank Indonesia stabilization measures. Rupiah appreciated in October as foreign capital inflows were maintained in line with increasing global liquidity and maintain investor confidence in the domestic economic outlook. Moving forward, Bank Indonesia expects rupiah to appreciate as the currency now is still fundamentally undervalued. It is supported by low and stable inflation, narrow current account deficit, attractive return of domestic assets, lower risk premium, and ample global liquidity. Next slide, please. The combination of subdued domestic demand and adequate supply resulted on low and stable inflation. As mentioned by Mr. Walsh, that low inflation is sometimes something as a global precedent now. Lower core inflation also influenced by consistency of Bank Indonesia to anchor inflation expectation and maintain exchange rate stability. From the volatile food, the compressed domestic demand, maintained supply and distribution, and low global food prices resulted a low volatile food inflation. Here we need to note the very good coordination between all related parties, including government, from the local and national level, and also Bank Indonesia in the inflation team to always maintain the availability of the supply of strategic foods and also the distribution. Bank Indonesia predicts that inflation in 2020 will be below the lower band of targets before then returning to its target of 3 ± 1% next year. With the government, both at central and regional levels, Bank Indonesia commits to continue strengthen policy coordination to keep inflation under control within its target range. At last, in slide 12, we put together how Bank Indonesia continues to strengthen its policy mix to mitigate COVID-19. Since February to July 2020, Bank Indonesia has lowered Bank Indonesia 7-day reverse repo rate at 100 BPS, now at 4.0%, maintaining the stabilization. Thus, there are rooms to support growth through accommodative macroprudential policy, quantitative easing, and focusing on quantity channel by providing liquidity to stimulate economic recovery. From the payment system policy, we also do some policy such as expanding QRIS acceptancy to accelerate small medium enterprises by extending 0% merchant discount rate and strengthening digital economy. Bank Indonesia will continue to implement the follow-up policy measures required to support the National Economic Recovery Program. Close policy coordinations with the Government and Financial System Stability Committee will constantly be strengthening to maintain macroeconomic and financial system stability, while accelerating national economic recovery. I think I have to end here. Back to you, Mr. Salah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reza. Maybe a quick, since I have you in the floor, you've been in Bank Indonesia since 1996. So how can you compare between the impact of the 2008-9 crisis and the current COVID-19 crisis, please?
Okay. Back to 20 years ago, 2008-2009, known as global financial crisis. We understood that at that time, the crisis started from financial sectors. The epicentrum was in the US, then transmitted to European countries. Finally, it spilled over to some emerging markets, including Indonesia, and also transmitted from financial sector to real sectors. But still, it was financial crisis. And even though the effects of the crisis impacted many countries outside US and Euro areas, but the epicentrums were still there. The epicentrums are still limited. That's why, referring to Mr. Wall's picture, the V-recovery for Asia countries then happened. Only 1 year, we already have recovered with very sharp recovery. What about now? The COVID-19. It's not only financial, it is a pandemic, spread quickly globally. Every country has their own epicentrum all around the world. It is threatening our life. It's not only our money, but our life. Thus, some protocol shall be implemented for the priority of life safety. That is the first, life safety. Some applied very strict protocols, some were less strict. Now here, the confidence of any economic agents were hampered. Economic activities dropped. We are not talking about 1 or 2 specific sectors, but broad-based. So this pandemic is much more complex. While we have to support the economy, what is important, we have to make sure having accurate measures to curb the pandemic itself. So we have to balancing about the response to the pandemic and also how to cure the economic recovery. So it is a more multi-dimensional situation, Mr. Salah.
Thank you. Just a quick one, maybe. Bank Indonesia's response. You've mentioned that. If you could elaborate on that, and could you give an indication just to comfort the participants on the monetary space? I mean, if the COVID-19 pandemic persists, what would be the expected response of the Bank Indonesia in the near future, please?
Okay, thank you. As I discussed earlier, that we are not only placed in monetary or macro policy, but now we are implementing a set of policy mix. From now on, Bank Indonesia is focusing on providing liquidity to the economy. In addition of providing the liquidity to the economy, we are implementing also some following measures. First, maintaining rupiah exchange stability policy in line with its fundamental
Ada. Itu di Lar.
And then second,
please,
strengthening monetary operation strategy to reinforce the accommodative monetary policy stance. And then implementing money market and forex market deepening through infrastructure development. And then fourth, we are also strengthening policy implementation to stimulate small medium enterprises through corporatizations, increasing their capacity, open the access to finance and digitalization as well, in line with the National Made Indonesia movement. So we have the new songs that National Made Indonesian movement. And last but not least, strengthening digital economy and finance ecosystem by using digital payment instruments, and also collaboration between banking industry, fintechs, e-commerce to support the national economic recovery program. I think that's all.
Thank you very much. Very elaborate, very inspiring, and very clear. Thank you very much, Ibu Riza. Now we will move quickly to the capital markets. Let's see. I mean, we had a good two presentations from Ibu Riza as well as from Mr. Walsh. And now it's time to go more to see how the capital markets are doing. For this, my first guest is Ibu Dwi Irianti. Ibu Dwi Irianti is the Director of Sharia Financing in the Ministry of Finance. She's currently also holding several ex-officio positions under state Sharia securities issuing companies. Sister Dwi has a Bachelor of Law from Diopongero University obtained in 1990, as well as a Master of Arts in Economics from the University of Delaware in the US. She's also the chairman of the Sukuk Development Division of the Indonesian Islamic Economics Association. She held that position from 2015-2019, as well as she's currently the chairman of the Education and Socialization Division of the Indonesian Islamic Economists Association, and she has been in this position since 2019. Ibu Dwi, you have the floor for something like 10 minutes before we pass to the questions. So please.
Thank you, Brother Jelasi, for the nice introduction. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning and good evening to all of you. Thanks and high appreciation to BI for conducting the first and the biggest ever virtual Sharia event, I believe. And thanks to BPKH for organizing this conference. Also, congratulations to BI for very successful series of Sharia side event of this ISEF. hope from this event, it will have a huge impact in developing Sharia economic and financial market in Indonesia as well as in global market. It is an honor for me to be here among all the prominent speakers and distinguished participants in this golden event. Please help me for the slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. Now allow me to begin with showing you Indonesia Islamic finance landscape. As of July 2020, total asset of Islamic finance, including Sharia compliant stock, have reached 1,639 trillion, equivalent to 111 billion US dollar, about 9.7 from the total financial asset in Indonesia. The growth rate of the Islamic finance was fluctuate. In which 2017 the growth reached 26.4%, and in 2019 going slower, 13.8%. But in 2020, only 10.65%. I believe all of us aware why that's happened, because one of the reasons of this slower growth was due to COVID-19 pandemic. As of July 2020, the Islamic capital market asset reached 60.15%, followed by Islamic banking 33.12%, and Islamic non-banking financial institutions 6.73%. And the 60.15% market of Islamic capital now is dominated by Sukuk Negara. Sukuk Negara is the name of Islamic sovereign securities issued by the government of Indonesia. Next slide, please. Here I would like to show you the whole picture of Sukuk Negara development. We issued Sukuk since 2008 with a small amount of 4.7 trillion IDR, equivalent with 300 million US dollar in 2008. And from the graph on your right hand side, it shows that Sukuk Negara issuance increased gradually from year to year. Started in 2015, the issuance reached above 100 trillion IDR, and last year in 2019, the total issuance reached 258 trillion IDR. Compared to previous year, in this year, 2020, due to widening budget deficit as impact of COVID-19 pandemic, as of 15 October, the issuance already reached 321 trillion IDR. There is a very significant increase, of course. We issued Sukuk in 3 methods. Auction, we do auction every 2 weeks and 24 times along the year. For specific investor, we open private placement. And for retail Sukuk, we have issued since 2009 for retail Sukuk. For individual investor, we do with book building method. We have many series of Sukuk Negara. In domestic, we have project bonds, project-based Sukuk, Sukuk Hedge Fund. I think Sukuk Hedge Fund is only happening in Indonesia. And Islamic fixed rate Sukuk, as well as retail Sukuk. And in global market, we issued in regular as well as green format. For investor types, I can tell you in domestic, we have institution and individual investor, and in global market, maybe I can show you by region. In Middle East, we have about 25%, but if we add with Malaysian investor, so we call Islamic investor, become 35%. In Europe, European investor about 11%, US investor about 21%, and Asia include Indonesia about 44%. And up to now, about in terms of akad, we have introduced 4 types of akad: ijarah sale and leaseback, ijarah al-khadamat, ijarah asset to be leased, and wakalah. Next slide, please. In the next slide, I would like to show you the creative and innovative of Sukuk Negara that we have done, especially during 2018 to 2020. First, innovative is project financing Sukuk, as I mentioned, where the proceeds of Sukuk are utilized directly to finance government project. From 2013 until 2020, Sukuk Negara financed many infrastructure such as road, bridge, university building, laboratories, etc., with total budget about 118 trillion IDR, or equivalent to 8 billion US dollar. Second innovative, we developed online retail Sukuk, an online platform which provide easy access for retail investor to be able to order government securities online. The government, in this case, appointed about 31 selling agents, consist of banks, securities company, and fintech company. For Sukuk itself, we introduced this platform since 2018, so about 2 years before this pandemic. And the third innovation is Green Sukuk. This is as part of a government commitment to step up its climate change, adaptation, and mitigation priorities. The government has developed a Green Sukuk framework. To be able to issue a Green Sukuk, of course, we have to develop such a framework. Under this framework, we plans to finance and refinance eligible green project via the issuance of this kind of Sukuk. From this issuance, 100% will be used exclusively to finance or refinance expenditure directly related to eligible green project. And the current innovations is cash wakaf link Sukuk. The purpose of cash wakaf link Sukuk issuance is to show the support of the government for the development of social investment and the development of productive wakaf in Indonesia. Through this series of cash wakaf link Sukuk, the government actually facilitates cash wakaf, both temporary and permanent, so people or community can invest their cash wakaf in a safe and productive investment instrument. Next slide, please. In relation to support the acceleration of infrastructure development starting in 2030, as I mentioned, the government has issued Sukuk Negara, especially designed to finance infrastructure project, namely Sukuk project, and total financing about 180 trillion. And we already financed a total project of more than almost 3,000 projects in 8 lines ministries across 34 provinces. From this slide, here you can see many pictures as an evidence of Sukuk projects. At least we have 7 sectors that we already finance. Here you can see a sector for road and bridge, about 592 projects, water resources, and about 579 projects. Transportations, we have rail and tunnel here, and also for education sectors, we built many schools building. And for religious sector, we built a Hajj dormitory and a religious affair office. And for environment sector, we finance about 14 projects of national park. Also for laboratory, we have been financed 15 projects, total amount of 1.3 trillion IDR. Next slide, please. This is retail suko that we have developed since 2009. The government has been issuing retail suko to enhance financial inclusion in Indonesia. The retail suko issuance encourage the society transformations from saving-oriented to investment-oriented society. Then 7 years later, we introduced online system in retail suko just in 2018, issuance process through online platform. This is a good thing because we found that we can tap millennial investor by 51%. Currently, there are 30 retail suko series with total investor reach more than 347,000. And 6-7 suko series, which is non-tradable, and the previous one is tradable, with more than 72,000 investors from 34 provinces around Indonesia. Next, please. I would like to show you about green suko success story issuance. We have been issued in global market 3 times in 2018, 2020 each year. Total issuance about 2.75 billion US dollar, as well as we issue in domestic market with retail format. This one is non-tradable, and the amount is 1.46 trillion with total investor 7,700 investor. With millennial investor reach about 51.07%. Green suko here that we issue in 2018 considered as the first sovereign green suko in the world, and alhamdulillah we already received about 8 or 9 award for this issuance, and we still continue here to issue green suko. Maybe next year we still continue, but we face many challenges in this green suko, because to be able to issue green suko, we have to develop what we call a green framework, and we have obligation after issuance, which is we have to provide annual green impact report, not just report but impact report. Next slide, please. The current innovation that I mentioned is cash wakaf link suko. The purpose to issue cash wakaf link suko actually is to support the development and innovation effort in the field of Islamic social finance and investment in Indonesia, and facilitating wakif to invest cash wakaf in a safe financial instrument, supporting the development of the Islamic financial market, especially the cash wakaf industry. Also, we keen to encourage the consolidation of Islamic social fund to finance various social projects. And of course, in our perspective, we would like to diversify investor and suku negara instrument. Also, we would like to encouraging and diversification of the Sharia banking business through optimizing the role of LKS PWU. Next slide, please. We continue to do issuance for cash wakaf link suko in retail format. We just offering and do launching in 9th of October, and now is still going process. So you are not able to participate, you still have time until 12th of November in cash wakaf link suko. The purpose is to support in strengthening fiscal capacity and institutional strengthening of BWI. BWI is Badan Wakaf Indonesia, a national Wakaf board, and strengthening the Nazir and Islamic financial institution. Also to support for achieving SDGs target, because the coupon or the profit of CWLS, Cash Wakaf Link Suko, to finance social infrastructure and social programs used to proceed from the cash wakaf instrument in Sukuk Negara. Also to increase the participation of the community, as I mentioned before. Also take advantage, of course, of this momentum of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we see many people just lost their job, so they need help from us. But in the other hand, all people still need money. The cash is the king for now. So in this Cash Wakaf Link Suko, people can help the other with still can have their money, because this wakaf is not perpetual but temporary. So within 2 years of tenure of Suko, the money will back to the investor or wakif. Next slide, please. This is still, this is just do marketing for people who still want to participate in Cash Wakaf Link Suko. We still have time till 12 November in 2020. And the selling agent or distribution partner here in Nazir is Mandiri Syariah, Bank Muamalat, BRI Syariah, and BNI Syariah. So I encourage you to participate and help issued in by government. Next slide, please. Here I would like to show quickly about the project that will finance by Cash Wakaf Link Suko. I divided into two sector. First is social, that have social impact, and the second is the project that has economic impact. For the social impact, there are worship, for example, increasing Islamic boarding operating income. And for education, for example, we do give scholarship to the students who need our help. And then for health, also we give deaf therapy for mustahik, around 1,000 hearing aids for poor children aged 1 month till 18 years in region. And for a project that has economic impact, we can see we support for micro, small, medium enterprise. We have education and training, provision of capital marketing and legality. Also, we support for duafa assistant in the form of training, mentoring, evaluation, and business capital for 15 people. In agriculture sector, we also will support for rice seed breeding in Lampung, about 40 months, and providing 40, this one is about 4 million a month to its people, its persons, and providing hydroponic agriculture assistance for 10 women or single parents who live in arid land areas, about 5 million a month. And also we support for farming, providing quality course in Trenggalek for 50 farmers. I think that's all my presentations, but to end my presentation, I would like to tell you about the challenge that we face in developing this sukuk market. For cash wakaf link sukuk, we face a hurdle because society still not clearly understand about what is wakaf, cash wakaf, how the rule, how the rule of the cash wakaf itself. And for green sukuk, the challenge is how we can provide prominent, what we call impact report every years. And we have to coordinate with many line ministers there. So this is the biggest challenge for us in developing a sukuk market. Okay, I would
thank you.
Back to,
thank you very much, Ibu Dwi. Very clear, very impressive journey. Indeed, you know, from 2008, I've been closely following the sukuk issuance by Indonesia, and it has come really a long journey with a quite also diversified and impressive geographical distribution from Europe, the US, Middle East, etc. So congratulations again. I'll come back to you in the wrap-up session for the sake of time. There are a few questions that we will take at the end in the wrap-up session, but I want fast to go to the last but not least speaker, Mr. Muhammad Ali Tawfiq. Brother Ali has joined the HSBC's Islamic finance team in 2007 and has focused on the development of the international sukuk market since 2009. He's worked on a number of sukuk transactions across sovereigns, corporates, and financial institutions. He's very familiar to my own institution. He has advised on the international sukuk deals of the Islamic Development Bank, as well as the sukuk issuance of our private sector arm, the ICD, or the Islamic Corporation for the Development of the Private Sector. He has also advised on the sovereign issuances in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Republic of Turkey, Qatar, Emirate of Sharjah, the Emirate of Sharjah in the UAE, the government of Hong Kong and the United Kingdom, as well as some corporate sukuks for Etihad Airways, Saudi Electricity Company, Emaar, DP World, and Investment Corporation of Dubai. Ali has been a chartered financial analyst since 2011. Yes, Ali, I mean, if you can take it from where Ibu Dwi has led us in terms of, and you know, globally, if you can take the issue, how the capital markets are performing within the light of this pandemic, and could you elaborate more on that? Yes, Brother Ali, you have the floor.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum and Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much, Brother Jalasi. It's a privilege to be here and presenting to the Bank Indonesia and BPK Islamic Investment Forum. You know, I think my presentation is very much in line with what Ibu Dwi from the Ministry of Finance in Indonesia talked about around the international sukuk market. Obviously, Indonesia is the largest issuer of international sukuk. So certainly it's, it's great to see the progress which the country has made, both in the international and the domestic market. I have a presentation, if it can be please shared on the screen. Thank you very much. So I will be covering the international sukuk market, which has developed really since the past 20 years. Obviously, there have been other countries and the domestic markets have been around for much longer. The likes of Malaysia, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, but the international sukuk market has developed over the past 20 years and has gone from strength to strength. If I can go to the next slide, please. So this slide just shows on the right hand side the volume of sukuk. When I say international sukuk, I mean cross-border sukuk, which is available for all investors to invest in. So the international sukuk market started off with very modest volumes back in 2002, with about $1.2 billion of sukuk being issued, primarily from Asia and primarily from the government of Malaysia. But since then, as you can see in these bar charts, the volumes have grown significantly and successfully since 2002 to reach around $25 billion approximately, year on year in the past 3 or 4 years. The red part of these bar charts shows the Middle East contribution to the volumes, followed by the gray from Asia, and then there's some volumes that we see from Europe, primarily from Turkey. The points on the left-hand side summarize the key takeaways from the international sukuk market. So for us in 2020, the volume of sukuk issued internationally is expected to exceed $30 billion, and that will be a record year in the international market. By end of this year. The Middle Eastern Middle Eastern issuers account for approximately 75% of the volumes which are issued, and these primarily come from the likes of Saudi Arabia, the likes of UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and so on. There are some markets within the Middle East which are developing in their Islamic finance footprint, and they include Oman, Egypt, and Jordan as well. From Asia, really the biggest issuer in international sukuk is Indonesia. It has really significantly increased the volume of issuance, as we saw in the previous presentation, starting off in 2009 and then being a regular issuer in the market since 2013. Overall, there have been more than 200 public sukuk issuances that have been issued in the in the international sukuk market since 2001. Giving a lot of diversification benefits to investors who are both come from the conventional investor space and also from the Islamic investor space. Year on year, we have seen compounded annual growth of approximately 21%. Since the beginning of this year, showing the strong growth in this market and the take-up from both issuers and from investors. And more recently, the fastest growing segment of the market is the green or sustainable sukuk issuances we have seen over the last 3 years. 3 of those issuances have come from the government of Indonesia, and 2 of them have been from the Islamic Development Bank, with a handful of other corporate issuers contributing to those 9 green or sustainable issuances. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I try to summarize the trends that we see in the international sukuk market. If you look at, starting with the chart on the left-hand side, by issuer type, mostly we see the sovereigns and the supranationals being the largest issuers in the market. These are led by governments such as Indonesia, Saudi Arabia. In the UAE, there are the local emirates, such as the Emirate of Dubai, the Emirate of Sharjah, and of course, in supranational space, the Islamic Development Bank and the ICD, which is the private sector arm of the IDB group. We see less corporate issuances, and I think that has to do with the fact that corporates generally tend to take their financing from the bank market, from the loan market, and that's why we don't really see corporates issuing as much as the sovereigns and supranationals. But we see a healthy amount of financial institutions in the Middle East in particular who also issue sukuk quite regularly. In terms of currency, the chart in the middle the US dollar continues to be the dominant currency of choice for international issuances. And a lot of this has to do with the investor base. In the Middle East countries, the US dollar is pegged to a number of currencies, or it's a very closely managed float. And we see that also in some of the other Asian countries as well. So really, the dollar continues to be the dominant choice, but we do see some issuances every year in euros and in some other currencies as well for cross-border sukuk issuances. By tenor, we see the 5 to 10 year maturities being the most popular in the sukuk market, but year on year we have been seeing increasing interest in longer dated and perpetual tenor issuance as well, to cater to some of the investors who are focused on very, very long-term investments. These are pension funds, these are insurance companies who invest in these type of issuances as well. Next slide, please. So this slide just summarizes the investment grade
Ali, if you could wrap up within 2 minutes so that we could take follow-up questions, please.
Sure,
For the
sure,
sake of the
sure.
time, please. Yeah.
So this just summarizes the international investment grade issuances, which have happened in the past, let's say, 12 months. As you can see, this is broken up into sovereigns, corporates, and FIs. Again, this just gives a flavor of the type of issuers that we see, with Indonesia being prominent, Islamic Development Bank, featuring quite a few times, and the government of Sharjah and ICD also, issuing in the past 12 months. Next slide, please. So really, the sukuk issuances in 2020 have formed a breakthrough year. We see the ICD coming back into the market since the last issuance they did, which was in April 2016. They have said that they will be a more frequent issuer, contributing towards the development of the private sector in the various member countries they operate in, which include Indonesia. They have around 50 member countries. We've seen the first ever COVID-19 response sukuk, which was issued by the Islamic Development Bank in response to the effects, the negative effects of which have happened because of COVID-19 pandemic since the beginning of this year. And we've also seen, the first ever triple tranche issuance by the government of Indonesia, raising $2.5 billion, and the first time they issued a 30-year sukuk as well. And then also I'd like to mention the Saudi Electricity Company. They did a green sukuk issuance, which was used to fund the smart meter project that they are enrolled, that they have rolled out in Saudi Arabia to try to reduce carbon emissions in their company's footprint. With that, I would like to hand back to Mr. Salah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ali. We have 5 minutes, so let me start by you, Ali. Just a continuation. In 1 minute, if you could, sort of wrap up and tell us, what are your suggestions? How to promote the resource mobilization in sukuk markets? What are your views on that?
Yes, thank you, Salah. So I think the focus of the sukuk market till the past few years was very much on raising of debt, but we've seen a shift in the thinking of issuers and investors to say, how can sukuk be used now to create and really to promote impact in the market? Examples are the green sukuk, which have been issued by the Islamic Development Bank. And the COVID-19 response sukuk, which has been issued. These are just examples of resource mobilization, where an issuer is using these, and the usage and the use of proceeds is very clearly towards, social or green impact. Of late, we are talking also about waqf linked sukuk, which is something which was covered in the previous presentation. Of late also, we have also been speaking with the Islamic Development Bank on introducing what is called the philanthropic sukuk. And a pilot project which we've been working on, which inshallah I hope to see come to fruition, is from the Red Crescent Society, which will be a sukuk issued, which will contribute towards the eradication of cholera in certain member countries of the Islamic Development Bank. So these are the types of sukuk which are being worked on. It's still fairly early stages. There is also another type of sukuk called a transition sukuk, which we are working on with Etihad Airways from UAE, and that is being used to reduce their carbon footprint from a high carbon emitter to a low carbon emitter. So a lot of work being done in the background, and inshallah, I hope by the time we have this forum again next year, then inshallah there'll be more to talk about with the audience here on resource mobilization.
Great. Thank you, Ali. A lot of innovation ahead, and hope we'll see you next year with good news. So let me go in the reverse order. Back to you, Ibu Dwi. There are two questions addressed, actually one question and one comment. Do you have any plan to issue sukuk in US denomination? And in the follow-up or comment on that question, Prima and Dayani wrote, one of the challenges for retail investors who are interested in USD denominated sukuk is tax regulation in Indonesia. Anyway, I wanted to take you more on to the to highlight, since you are the Ministry of Finance, I wanted you to highlight the fiscal, but there are two questions that if you want you can address. And maybe as a wrap up in 1 minute only, please, to give the opportunity for our first two speakers. The fiscal response measures if you could elaborate on the fiscal measures by the government of Indonesia in facing the impacts of COVID-19.
Okay, thank you, brother. And it's good questions. I think, as I mentioned before, we issue in US dollar dominated in global markets since 2009. And as mentioned by Brother Ali from its HSBC, that now we have become a frequent issuer in the global market, and we are leading the market now with total issuance more than, I guess, almost 20 billion US dollar in the market. Even compared to Saudi and Malaysia, we are in the first rank now. About US dollar and retail, from a regulation perspective, we have been able to issue that, but I guess that's about the demand of the retail US dollar sukuk. We have to see and maybe need a study for that, because for issuing such instrument, we have to do a study first. For the fiscal measure for now, as we know that government policy in handling the impact of COVID-19 is to make fiscal deficit more flexible by produce a new law number 2/2020. And as we know that the deficit now become 6.34%, and how the sukuk can support this budget, actually, we can see from our target for the first, from the beginning of this year, our target only 191 trillion rupiah. But after this pandemic, because of the widening of budget deficit, our target increasing significantly, about 91%. So now our target is 360 trillion rupiah. And all those issuance support for the government policy to support for economic as well as for society and any other stimulus that I think everyone already know from the media.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me go quickly to give 1 minute for the wrap up to Ibu Riza. Maybe you've actually mentioned in your presentation very important topics. You mentioned SMEs, which we know are the backbone of all the economies of most of our countries as the Islamic Development Bank Group, financial inclusion, etc. Maybe if you could elaborate on that very briefly and link that to the main factors that could support and expedite the Indonesia's recovery process.
Thank you, Mr. Salah. The key factors to support Indonesia's recovery process. May I summarize into 5 points? One, of course, continuation of fiscal support through accelerating budget spending. And second, Bank Indonesia's policy, which focus on the quantity channel by providing liquidity.
Please, I could ask participants to mute their mics, except of course Ibu Riza. Please unmute Ibu Riza. Unmute
Okay.
your mic.
The first is the continuation of fiscal support through accelerating budget spending. And the second, Bank Indonesia's policy, which focus on the quantity channel by providing liquidity, including support from the government in accelerating state budget realization. And third, continuing bank loan restructuring program, including small medium enterprises that account for 36% of total credit. And 4, strategy to support priority sectors, which are productive sectors that can operate safely in this condition. Some sectors here start gaining momentum of gradual export recovery, as I showed in the presentation. And last, number 5, accelerate the strengthening of digital economy. All of those, of course, will work well with the synergy of all elements of this nation. Government, Bank Indonesia, OJK, and also all economic agents in Indonesia.
Thank you very much, Riza. A last word for you, James, but I believe that you will not embarrass me more on the organizers because we are already 5 minutes behind. Just how do you see the Sharia markets in the future from the IMF perspective? I believe that as IDB and IMF, we had a common program in terms of Islamic finance, capacity building, etc. And I would like you to elaborate on how you see the future of this industry.
I think that we view Sharia compliant financial products as an important alternative that would allow opportunities for governments to widen the spread of how they can finance their deficits and find more customers. We think it's important to increase inclusion in the financial system and to further develop financial markets. And we hope that there can be innovation in this market to continue to develop it, and that can be done in a way that is stable and inclusive. And I hope that was short enough.
Thank you. That was great. So thank you very much. I believe we have addressed most of the questions that we have received. Thank you very much for very well elaborate and deep presentations from all the speakers. And let me give it back to the organizers with the apologies of being 6 minutes behind, and my last words of thanks and appreciation to 2,087 participants who have been with us today. Thank you very much, and back to you, Ibu Putri.
Thank you, Mbak Putri. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma sholli ala Muhammad wa ala ali sayyidina Muhammad. Rabbi sholli sadri wa yassirli amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Distinguished speakers, participants, brothers and sisters, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to the second session on the second day of Islamic Investment Forum. As explored in the first sessions, the development of sukuk and other Islamic investment vehicles in the last decade has shown the growing significance of the Islamic finance industry to be part of the global economic development elements. However, the coronavirus outbreak, which has brought an unprecedented significant setback to the global economic development, also pushed back the Islamic economic and finance, which heavily attached to the real economic. In order to finance the capital needs, international sukuk has grown to be one of the alternative instruments in the capital market, which is considered by both Islamic and non-Islamic issuers. Supply of international sukuk are mostly coming from Middle East and North Africa region and issued in US dollar denomination, whereas the non-US dollar international sukuk are quite limited to only about 4% of the international sukuk holdings. On the demand side, high interest from investors to this global sukuk issuance has generally driven oversubscription. We can see international participants has begun to increase in several issuance this year. In these sessions, we are going to discuss further about how to manage Sharia compliance portfolio. We are very blessed that today we have 4 prominent speakers representing the different aspects of the investment area. From the issuer side, we have Mr. Muhammad Istiak Akbar from Islamic Development Bank, From the investor side, we have Ibu Dr. Huriah Al Islami from BPKH, Datuk Paduka Syed Masyafuddin Syed Badarudin from Principal Islamic Asset Management, and Mr. Johari Ali bin Abdullah from Aberdeen Standard Islamic Investment Malaysia Berhad. I expect a speaker will present maximum 12 minutes, and after the last speaker, we will continue with the Q&A sessions. To all participants, if you have any question, please write down your questions in the chat room, and I shall read them later. Now we start with the first speakers. I would like to invite Mr. Muhammad Istiaq Akbar to share his view from ISUR perspective, particularly from Multilateral Development Bank. Currently, Mr. Istiaq Akbar is the country manager in the Islamic Development Bank Group Regional Hub in Indonesia. It starts with relationship and partnership management, business development, and portfolio management for the ISDB member countries in the Southeast Asia region. During his career in the ISDB spanning 15 years, he has worked on managing the cumulative portfolio of more than 20 development projects amounting to more than $1 billion across 10 countries in Asia and Africa. A key highlight of his work was being one of the pioneers who initiated the community-driven development project in the ISDB group, starting with the ICDD program in Indonesia in support of the National Program of Community Empowerment. Mr. Istiaq Akbar is the Sri Lankan national, and he finished his undergraduate and postgraduate doctoral studies in mechanical engineering in Imperial College London, UK. Without further ado, Mr. Istiaq, the time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and greetings to everyone. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers BPKH and Bank Indonesia for giving me the opportunity to present on the topic today. And I'd also like to thank them for the excellent arrangements virtually for the 7th ISEF and the arrangement of all the prominent events that have happened so far. Thank you very much to the moderator, Ibu Anastuti, for the kind introduction. In the interest of time, let me get right into the presentation. Can you please put up the slides, please? Thank you very much. Next, please. So in terms of the presentation that I'll be making today, I'll start off by giving a very quick overview of the Islamic Development Bank Group, and then highlight the work that we've done in Indonesia to date. Then I will present some of the portfolio management practices within the group, mainly by the entities. But the focus of my presentation will be on the project portfolio management practices of the ISDB itself, with a focus on the public sector portfolio activities that we have around the world. I'll then link it up with some of the issues that we face generically, but also some of the challenges that have been brought up in portfolio management as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then provide some conclusions as we move along. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Very quickly, the Islamic Development Bank is a multilateral development bank, and we have 57 member countries spread over 4 continents. We are unique as a MDB because we are completely South-South, which means that all our member countries or shareholders are also beneficiaries of the Islamic Development Bank products and services. Recently, starting from 2018, we have undertaken an expansion or decentralization move. So we have the headquarters based in Jeddah, but we also have 11 regional hubs spread across our key constituent regions. We are AAA rated by all the 3 rating agencies, and as such, we are the only AAA rated institution within the OIC institutions. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the Islamic Development Bank Group consists of the parent body, the ISDB, which primarily focuses on the public sector finance, PPP, capital markets, as well as the South-South Cooperation brand, which is the reverse linkages within the Islamic Development Bank, as well as the entities. We have the Islamic Research and Training Institute, IRTI. We have our Islamic Insurance arm, ISEC, the private sector finance arm, ICD, the Islamic Corporation for the Development of the Private Sector. We have our short-term trade financing arm, the International Islamic Trade Finance Corporation, and we have our dedicated poverty alleviation fund, which is called the Islamic Solidarity Fund for Development, which provides concessional financing to our member countries. Next, please. This is a quick overview of our products and services. I'm not going to go into detail on all of them, but primarily the products and services that we deal with in our member countries are project finance and trade finance, along with our Islamic insurance products. And then we also have our capital issuances in the Sukuk market. Next, please. In terms of Indonesia, Indonesia is one of the founding member countries of the Islamic Development Bank, and it joined back in 1974 with the creation of the Islamic Development Bank. We have started operations in Indonesia since 1978. And since then, we are proud to say that we have supported Indonesia with over $7.2 billion worth of investments and support, primarily coming from our public sector finance, which is ISDB, which accounts for about over $3 billion US, followed by trade finance activities coming close to $2 billion US. We also have insurance covers provided by our insurance arm, ISEC, for about $1 billion, and support to the capital markets of the country with over $1 billion US as well. Our major footprints have been in the agriculture sector, as well as the education sector, followed by transport, industry and mining, as well as the energy. Next slide, please. So before moving into the bulk of the presentation, which will focus on the public sector portfolio management practices, I just want to highlight some of the what our entities do in terms of the portfolio management practices. Given the private sector nature and given the short-term nature, they rely on the partners and the co-financiers to support in the due diligence and the portfolio management. And they do conduct annual reviews as well as development effectiveness reviews on a periodic basis, as well as site visits and client review checks based on third-party as well as internal analysis. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of the ISDB itself, in terms of portfolio management, given that we are development oriented and not driven by commercial and financial feasibility purely, we cover the entire project cycle when it comes to putting in place portfolio management measures, and this covers from the entry, implementation, all the way to the exit phase. And as you will see in the next slides, we will see how these portfolio management practices are put in effect in the ISDB. Next, please. So I'm changing the style, and most of the presentation will be on pictorial representations. So as I mentioned, even during the due diligence phase, we are concerned and we work very closely with our clients and beneficiaries in the design of the project. And we do validations and site visits to ensure that the project design is as per the required standards and will meet the expected objectives. In this regard, we also put in place strong project management unit structures and support to the project implementation teams by either bringing in experts or support structures such as consultancies to support them in the project management and supervision activities. We also engage extensively in stakeholder consultations, both during the due diligence and even after, the project has started implementation to have this continuous dialogue and continuous review of the progress of our projects under the portfolio. Next, please. In terms of our support to the project management, given that we are development heavy and development mandated, as well as given the nature of our Islamic financing, we do a lot of hand-holding and support to the project implementation teams who actually implement the project on our behalf on the ground. And this includes providing technical backstopping, where we give them a lot of capacity building, as well as training on different project management aspects and technical aspects related to the different projects. We get involved in a lot of fiduciary reviews, which covers the procurement aspects, the disbursement aspects, as well as the audit requirements of our projects under the portfolio. There will be regular site visits that are made by our teams, as well as supervision activities undertaken on site and with our clients in their offices. Next, please. We also get involved in contract management because we do control the disbursements that are made under our portfolio. So as such, we have systems in place to make sure that there are very strong contract management practices in place in terms of reporting, as well as managing the financial fund flows to our projects. We do engage in capacity building activities of the different stakeholders, especially when it comes to procurement, when it comes to financial management. As I mentioned before, we have a robust system of M&E, which looks at the results at an interim, as well as the output levels when it comes to the projects under the portfolio. Next slide, please. Let me, next, please. Thank you. We also have a periodic review of all our projects, both coming on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, and annual basis, and they can vary from project level to an overall macro portfolio level analysis of how our projects are performing under each of the member countries. Next, please. In terms of the issues that we face in portfolio management and the things that we look out for on a generic level, I'm not going to go into the whole list, but just to highlight that we look at making sure that there is consistency in the decision making, there is regular communications with follow-ups and technical meetings as needed to be proactive when it comes to identifying issues that may affect the implementation. We are very careful on the procurement side because these are public sector procurement, which need to follow the guidelines of our procurement regulations. We also have concerted views on the land acquisition aspects as well. So moving on to COVID-19, very quickly, we were faced at the start of the year as with all the projects in terms of the stoppages in our implementation, especially affecting the civil works, and a lot of force measures were coming out, but they have now stabilized and work has begun. We also faced logistics limitations due to which affected the supply of goods and equipments in our projects. We had limitations in conducting our supervision and portfolio follow-ups, but these have now moved to a virtual platform and have resumed. But more importantly, we were concerned that the grassroots level results were slowed and delayed to the detriment of the beneficiaries on the ground. But however, given the new normal situation, we have now come to a rebalancing of our activities, as you will see in the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of the portfolio management summary, I've just put it on the right-hand side of this slide. As I mentioned before, we play a strong role in implementation support and oversight, although we don't get directly involved in implementation, given that we appoint an agent as per the Islamic Sharia structure. We focus a lot on capacity building and ownership, and we get involved in all the entire project cycle. We have adjusted our activities due to the COVID-19 reality, and as such, we also have a special package to support our member countries and provide greater responsiveness within the COVID-19 context. And as such, we are being very flexible in our support to the member countries in terms of providing both financial and technical support. With that, next slide, please. I just wanted to present that we are present in Indonesia, in Senopati, in Jakarta, and if you have any further queries, we are happy to take forward the discussion in due course. And thank you very much, and back to the moderator, Ibu Anastuti. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Istiar. It is very interesting to see how the fund provided by member countries is used to boost a real sector economy project, and while still maintaining the governance and also accountability aspect. As part of BI, Bank Indonesia Reserve Management, we always participate in sukuk bonds from ISDB. Next, I would like to invite the second speaker, Ibu Dr. Huriah El Islami from BPKH, to see how Sharia compliant portfolio is managed in Indonesia Hajj Fund Management Agency. Dr. Huriah is the best national and global Islamic finance activist, proponent award winner from Bank Indonesia in 2018, who currently serves the executive board of BPKH Indonesia and the ISDB APIF Supervisory Committee since June 2020. Recently awarded Anugerah Tokoh Alumni by IIUM. She is also AAOIFI Master Trainer, FAA Certified Assessor, IFN Advisory Board Member, Sharia Board Member, and Strategic Advisor of Islamic FinTech Alliance. Until recently, she was IMF expert in Islamic finance and a member of the Islamic Finance Advisory Council in the AIFC. She was trained in leadership in General Counsel in 2019 and negotiation and leadership by Harvard Law School in 2012. She received multiple academic awards, including from the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. Graduated as the best overall LLB student from the International Islamic University in Malaysia. Wrote multiple publications in several disciplines, including Islamic finance, and was IFN correspondence on legal frameworks. She has been providing advice and consultancy to regulators and titles in several jurisdictions on Islamic finance-related matters. Dr. Huriah, you may start the presentation.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa na'udzubillahi min sururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina may yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa may yudlil fala hadiyalah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asrofil anbiya'i wal mursalin sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahu bi ihsan ila yaumiddin. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli, amma ba'du. Your Excellencies, Professors, Doctors, fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity. Today I would like to share about the Sharia compliant global portfolios that BPKH is authorized to do. And let's to save time, let's actually take a look at the presentation. May I have my presentation, please? Thank you. So as the title suggests, but before we go into the details as what BPKH by law is allowed to do, let us actually introduce what BPKH is. Next page, please. Okay, BPKH, the Badan Pengelola Keuangan Haji, or the equivalent will be the Hajj Fund Management Agency, was established pursuant to the law number 34 of 2014 on the Hajj Fund Management Agency, the Hajj Fund Management, and in order to regulate and implement the authorities and the duties that have been accorded therein, there are two laws that were further introduced. The first one being the Regulation of the Government number 5, year 2018, and the Regulation of the President number 110, year 2017. So when we talk about the Hajj Fund or the Keuangan Haji, basically there are two components to it. We have the Dana Haji, basically the fund being paid by the pilgrims towards their registration to go for Hajj. And on the other side, we have what we call Dana Abadi Umat, or the People Perpetual Fund. Despite these two elements or components to Hajj Fund, the definition itself encompasses a much larger aspect, as it includes all rights and obligations of the central government. that can be valued against money related to the Hajj administration, as well as all assets in terms of money or goods that can be valued as a result of the implementation of these rights and obligations originating from the Hajj congregation or other legal and non-binding sources. Next page, please. The objective of the Hajj fund management are to improve the quality of organization of the Hajj, to improve the rationality and efficiency in spending of BPIH, and BPIH is the cost in the overall conduct of the Hajj. And the third is to improve the benefits for the Muslim Ummah of Indonesia, of course. And when we do the Hajj fund management, it is based on not less than 6 principles. First, it has to be Sharia compliant, through and through. And second, it has to be prudent. The third, whatever we do, it has to generate benefit for the Muslim, and in particular for the pilgrims. And whatever we do not benefit ourselves. So this is the element where basically the law wants us to try to optimize the return for the Hujjaj, for the pilgrims, and for the people of Indonesia, but not to exceed or to actually go further just because it may actually benefit ourselves. So the law already provides that we cannot benefit ourselves or the board members, be it the supervisory board member or the executive board members. We are not getting bonuses, we don't get any benefit, dividend, etc., etc. And in doing the management of the fund, we have to be very transparent. And with respect to transparency, we actually do our regular and periodical report, be it to the supervisory board and also to the president. We have the monthly, quarterly, each semester, and even annual report. And we are also being audited internally and also by the BPK, the National Board Audit. And we also publish our the report of our activities, our operation within BPKH, and this is available on our website. So feel free, if you'd like to know what has been going on, what we have done in the past 2.5 years, you can actually view them on our website. And in terms of accountability, we are accountable to the President through the Minister of Religious Affairs. And obviously, we also have this 2-tier approval system for, in particular, with respect to the placement of the fund and also the investment. Therefore, this alone has strengthened the accountability aspect in the management of the fund, because every proposal for the investment or for the placement has also to be approved by the supervisory board that consists of the 7 people appointed or rather selected by the Dewan Perwakilan Rakyat. Next, please. Okay, being a civil law country, and because in BPK, of course, is subject to the system in Indonesia, for every aspect of our operation, it has to be regulated by law. So aside to the law number 34 of year 2014 and the law number and the government regulation number 5 of year 2018 and the president regulation number 110 of year 2017, there are several peraturan Badan Pengelola Keuangan Haji. These are the laws. They are being gazetted. And they are specific to BPKH, although because they are being gazetted, the law are actually enforceable against everyone in Indonesia. So we have enacted several laws. 21 actually is not. We have the most recent one only enacted this year. So I'll just go through this very quickly because you can access each of this in on our website as well. In year 2018, we have 10 of them. Next, please. And then in the 2019, we have 5, and this year we already have 6. So that makes actually the total of 21. Okay, next page, please. Now, in terms of this fund under the management, and this is where we would like to concentrate since we have only 20 minutes to share with you on this presentation. As you can see, the size of the keuangan haji itself, the Hajj fund, has increased at the approximately 10 trillion rupiah each year. So we have about 112 in 2018, 124 in 2019, and it grew to 139.7 as of August this year. And out of this fund that we have under our management at the moment, 66% of the fund are actually being invested mostly in Sukuk, and 34% are still being placed by BPKH in the BPS BPH. And this BPS BPH basically those commercial Sharia compliant bank and the unit, the windows of the Sharia windows of conventional bank that have been appointed by BPKH to run specific task that is to manage the fund for BPKH, either to receive the payment from the pilgrim who would like to register for Hajj, and also further on to actually manage the fund, place it in deposit, etc. Next page, please. It is projected that after this year, after 2020, whereas now we are going to have about 140 trillion, it is expected that next year the size of our of the fund will be in the range of 146 trillion. It will go to 153 trillion in 2022, 267 trillion in 2023, and 177 trillion in 2027. As you can see, 2024, sorry. As you can see, the average of the increase is actually 10 trillion. This is the natural increase, and we are expecting it could we could actually exit this projection if we can actually if we can optimize our investment better, and we can ensure the return as we try our best to get the best for the Muslim Ummah, inshallah. Next page, please. Now, how do we optimize the Hajj fund? The law stipulates that there are two ways. We do placement at BPS BPH. These are the bank that I said have been appointed by BPKH to manage the fund on our behalf. And we can do investment. What is quite interesting about investment, we could start doing the investment by law in 2018 after the government regulation was passed, particularly in February 2018. But at that time, because we were still under the mandate that we have to actually have our internal SOP procedures, etc. So it doesn't take very fast, and mostly we still concentrated on the sukuk that we have with the government and with the corporates at that time. But as of this year, alhamdulillah, there is a good change in BPK, and we are hoping by doing this, we can actually focus more in getting better return from a very responsible and manageable investment. So there are three divisions in BPKH that focus on the investment. We have the first one concentrating on the Sharia securities and gold investment. We have the other one that is focusing on domestic direct and other investment within Indonesia. And then we have the last one that is the new department under my leadership at the moment, that is the foreign direct and other investment. This is the area that we are concentrating now. This is the area where we will spread and we'll try to actually build our global Sharia compliant portfolio. Next page, please. Now, you may be wondering, we are in Indonesia, we have to respect our nation, we have to actually think of our people. Why would BPKH want to go overseas? Why would we want to invest in the foreign country? There are several reasons, and let me share 6 among those. First of all, the truth is our largest expenditure in BPKH is in foreign currency. Every year, we have to pay for those people who would like to go for Hajj, not just the subsidy, but the expenses are actually in foreign currency in USD and SAR. And the size of it is not small, it's quite significant, 80% of our expenditure, that's huge. And that is despite of the fact, going to the second point, there is a currency mismatch. What do I mean by currency mismatch? The depositors, the people who register for Hajj, when we talk about the regular Hajj, they're paying in Indonesia rupiah. Whereas our expenses, even for those regular Hajj, when they go for Hajj, we have to pay the expenses in USD and SAR. So there is this currency mismatch, and with the volatility of the exchange between the two currency or three, there's a huge risk on BPKH that we may actually have to top up extra fee or extra expenses. We have to actually have the source for extra expenses just to cover the difference between the two currencies in the exchange rate. So there is this second point, currency mismatch. And there is also payment mismatch. And what I mean by payment mismatch is the amount that the pilgrims paid and the real cost. What the pilgrims, we have 230,000 about approximately each year, including the additional quota. Our pilgrims, they have been paying only about 35 million from their own pocket, but the real cost for last year, for example, it is almost 72 million. And even when they pay 35 million, they are getting back 1,500 rial as their living costs. So therefore, in reality, they are paying only about 29 million. The difference, which is actually reaching up to almost 40 million in reality, are being paid by BPKH. So again, you know, this factor, taking into account the first factor, second factor, this is the more reason why BPKH has to diversify, why BPKH has to invest in foreign currency, especially those currency being the largest expenses of BPKH, that is USD and SAR. And of course, there are other reasons which we are going to look into now. The fourth reason, natural hedging. Of course, we need to do natural hedging because our largest expenditures in USD and SAR. So when we invest in those two currencies, basically this is just doing natural hedging in our investment portfolio. Diversification, this is very important because, you know, you cannot guarantee that the economy of certain particular region will be doing well all the time. So if we invest mostly in Indonesia and na'udzubillah min zalik, for certain reason, one way or the other, at certain period of time, the region, the Asia or East Southeast Asia, for example, doesn't do well, then having the diversification of investment in other country would help, would still generate the return for the pilgrims. Why we have to do this? Because irrespective whether or not Indonesia do well, whether or not Southeast Asia do well, the pilgrims will still go for Hajj. They don't care whether we are doing well or not, the country doing well or not. When their time has come and it is allowed for them to go, they will go. So we still have to generate the money that we use to subsidize them. And last but not least, of course, Kaabah, Mina, Muzdalifah, Arafah are located in Makkah, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And because of the two major obligation, the objective of the law number 34, that says that we have to actually improve the quality of the services, we have to actually improve the efficiency of the expenses. So the best way to control both the quality and the cost for those services that our pilgrims need in Madinah, in Makkah, in Mina, Muzdalifah, are of course by us, BPKH, to invest in those areas, in the services that the pilgrims require. Next page, please. Okay, now recently, only like a couple of weeks ago to be exact, on the 20th of this month, Alhamdulillah, we have already had our BPKH Regulation number 6 of year 2020 enacted, sudah diundangkan, and this particular peraturan BPKH, this regulation, specifically deals with the procedures and form of Hajj fund management in foreign country. So the law, among others, this regulation, among others, stipulate that investment could be done in the direct investment form and other investment form, with the limit, the total limit between the local and the foreign investment in a form of a direct investment not exceeding 20%, and for the other kind of investment, be it foreign or local, not exceeding 10%. That's the limit set by the government regulation number 5, year 2018, and we follow that. What does it mean? What does the law mean by direct investment? We follow through what the government regulations provide. That is include company establishment, so we can establish company abroad in Saudi, for example. We could do equity placement when we, let's say, if we can identify certain businesses which are good in Saudi and we would like to actually invest in it, we can actually participate. We can do investment partnership, and we can do other direct investment. And what are the direct investment have been actually stipulated for the in this regulation. And the regulation also stipulate what other investments are. This is specifically because in the government regulation, it just mentioned that for other kind of investment, it is as determined by BPKH. So how we determine this other kind of investment, they are now being determined by virtue of this PBPKH number 6 year 2020. So among others is stipulate that other kind of investment can be done in foreign banking products of foreign financial institution as long as they are supervised by respective regulatory bodies, money market instrument, capital market instrument, financing, asset management, portfolio management, Hajj-related investment services, list of land, building, any other valuable goods. So by looking at this, you can see for Hajj-related services, for example, it could be direct investment if we invest directly to it, or it could be other kind of investment if we do it by way of leasing, for example. How about the investment tenor? The regulation stipulate it could be short term, less than 1 year, or up to 1 year, or it could be medium term, 1 year, more than 1 year, less than 5 years, or up to 5 years, and anything above 5 years is considered as a long-term investment. Next page, please.
You have 2 more minutes.
Yes. So when do we do? Okay, we do 2 types of investment: non-Hajj related investment and Hajj related investment. When do we do non-Hajj related investment? Only when we have specific purposes, there is strategic investment, portfolio diversification, yield enhancement, natural hedging. So for example, for strategic investment, we have done our first foreign investment with the ISDB. That is, we are investing in APIF, the Awqaf Property Investment Fund. And next page, please. For the Hajj related investment, inshallah, our purpose and our aim, we are hoping that we can actually create Hajj ecosystem. What do we mean by Hajj ecosystem? We would like to actually invest in all the aspects that will create the ecosystem for our Hujjaj. We are hoping that when our pilgrims will go from Indonesia to Saudi, in all aspects that they are spending, in all aspects of services that they require, BPKH is there. Then BPKH basically not only there to pay, but also, as part of the investment, that's mean, like we pay from our right pocket, it goes back to our left pocket. Of course, it's a process. It will be a long process, but we are trying to do it soon. Please pray for us. We are hoping that, inshallah, not only that we can give the best of services, ensuring the quality of the services by the investment, but also we can make the optimal return and responsibly. And very prudent by doing our investment abroad, particularly in Saudi. And that's it. I think next page is thank you, alhamdulillah. So I hope next page please. Thank you, right? Yes. So basically that's it, Bu Anastuti. I hope I actually present within the allocated time. Thank you so much. Jazakillah khair. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Huria. Your presentation is showing us that the Hajj Fund in Indonesia is managed according to Sharia principles: prudent, transparent, accountable, benefit, and non-profit. You say that you have like currency mismatch. I can feel you, Ibu, because we are on the same boat actually. In this current global the high uncertainty in the global market, by having the currency mismatch is maybe will create a high cost in your financial budget. Again, thank you, Ibu. Maybe we can explore furthermore in during Q&A sessions. Now I would like to invite the speakers from the other investor point of view, Dato' Paduka shared, to elaborate further on the investor appetite for Islamic financial products. Dato' Paduka Syed has been recently appointed as the CEO of Group Islamic Asset Management. He will be accountable for the Islamic business across the Southeast Asia region and all other markets where the Group Islamic capabilities are being promoted. Dato' Paduka Syed has had a stellar career at CIMB Group since 1997. In May 2016, he was transferred to CIMB Principal Asset Management to head its institutional and corporate business. On July 2017, he was appointed as CEO of CIMB Principal Islamic Asset Management, currently known as Principal Islamic Asset Management. Dato' Paduka Syed has joined honors degree in computer science and accounting from the University of Manchester, UK, and Master of Science in International Banking from the University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, UK. He is a CFA charter holder. Dato' Paduka Syed, you may start your presentation.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and thank you very much Ibu Anastuti, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers, Bank Indonesia and BPKH for this invitation. It's indeed an honor for me to present our paper on behalf of Principal Islamic Asset Management. I would like to take us through to the presentation. If you could have it on the screen, please. Thank you very much. On the first page, on the next page, I'll be talking about, next page, please. Just a quick overview of the Principal Group, our capabilities and clients, how we came to formation based on the MIFC or the Malaysia International Islamic Financial Center, how that has resulted in the Islamic finance ecosystem here in Malaysia, and as what Ibu Anastuti mentioned, our expectations in terms of investor focus going forwards into 2021. Next page, please. Very short summary of the group as a whole. We are formerly known as CIMB Principal Group. Two shareholders, you'll be very familiar with CIMB Group in Indonesia and Principal Group out of Des Moines in Iowa. We are a JV, 60-40, 60% owned by Principal Group and 40% by CIMB, with presence in ASEAN here, across Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, of course in Malaysia. Group AUM in ASEAN is about 21 billion as of July, with 6.5 or so in Islamic assets management under management. On the next page, just take your attention to the bottom left. 3 billion in equities, 1.7 in fixed income, money markets 1.3, and just 100 million or so dollars in private equity. So these are using June numbers of $6.21 billion. On the next page, just very briefly what we do. Next slide, please. Business model, INSTI mandates, sub-advisory, white label products, current strategies. I'll speak a bit about that later on. Global equities, global sukuk, which has been covered in depth today by the previous speakers. Asia Pacific, equities, balanced funds, equities in Malaysia and sukuk, with a few strategies coming on stream over the next couple of months. On the next page, how I mentioned earlier about the MIFC, this is very similar, I understand, to what you have in Indonesia. In 2006, the government here started the MIFC, which was formed to basically propel Malaysia as a global international financial center, pulling in all the regulators, the government, ministries, agencies, industry players, the banks, takaful operators, and capital market industries, the banks, and so on. Capital market, human capital development institutions, and also legal firms, Sharia, and other research companies were also pulled in, with a focus of business offerings in the instruments, sukuk equities, international banking, takaful business, and wealth management, which is where we are, of course, and developing the whole ecosystem by having professional ancillary services as well. On the next page, what the government did was basically to enhance ease of licensing requirements, focusing on Sharia compliant retirement funds, having sustainable and responsible investments, which is key to what we have going into the current market situation with COVID and so on. Tax exemptions and incentives are a big area of focus. Possibility of investing AUMs abroad, liberalizing foreign shareholding requirements, and establishing bilateral and multilateral arrangements for cross-border offerings. So now we have capital markets growing about 8%, with the overall market being about $800 trillion as of end of last year. On the next page, I've taken this model. It could differ across countries. If you go into Middle East, and UAE, for example, has a very different framework. But in Malaysia, there has been a lot of emphasis to develop the system by having tax deductions, exemptions, incentives across the different segments, issuers, investors, intermediaries. I won't go through in great detail, but if you're talking about issuers of sukuks, for example, there are tax exemptions or deductions on expenses, stamp duty exemptions on documents, RPGT exemptions, and in the instances where you use SPVs, there are also incentives there. For investors such as retail and corporate, tax exemptions on profit paid to non-resident companies, on profit paid to investors, for example, and in the case of Islamic REITs, which is very similar to the conventional framework, tax incentives on dividends, for example, provided 90% of profits are paid up to unit holders. On the next page, of more relevance to the asset management industry, fund managers such as principal income tax exemptions on income received from 2007 to 2020, and institutions such as the EPF and Tabung Haji here in Malaysia, outsourcing billions to enhance or to attract and develop the local market. That has happened, that has resulted in is significant contribution and participation of foreign banks, foreign asset managers such as ourselves now, and players from Europe and America setting up shop in Malaysia. That will, of course, result in transfer of technology, improvement in local asset managers, know-how, local talent development, and so on. And in the area of talent development, tax relief to individuals for fees spent issuing Islamic finance, tax exemptions for income received by non-residents who've come to move to Malaysia for jobs related to Islamic finance, and double deductions on certain expenses, for example. So on the next page, what that has resulted in, this is a very simplistic diagram which can be applicable across other countries. Centered on consumers, you have financial institutions, companies, pension funds, and of course asset managers participating one way or another in the Sharia compliant instruments, either as issuers, investors, or outsource fund managers on behalf of the consumers. And we see this as a trend, a system that will be here and further enhanced as both the consumers and the issuers, for example, are more comfortable with the environment. And what that has resulted in Malaysia, and I'm sure elsewhere, is that a big segment of investors are not necessarily Muslims. Here in Malaysia, you have 80% of listed companies being Sharia compliant category, and because of the stable nature of the returns, especially over periods of uncertainty such as what we're having now, and in the GFC period 10, 12 years ago, there has been a lot more fund flow into Islamic stocks, for example, where returns have been a lot more stable and less volatile. On the next page, I mentioned earlier that the role played by pension funds and Hajj-related or other institutions in terms of giving out mandates. This has helped us, of course, in terms of fund management business, helping us develop local talent. But when you give out mandates around strategies such as global equities, real estate, global sukuk, Asia-Pac equities, there is a big element of asset and liability management The previous speaker, Ibu Dr. Huria, mentioned about having to manage, having the natural hedge requirements, having to manage the cost, especially when a lot of the liabilities are in non-domestic, of course, in Malaysia, ringgit, in Indonesia, rupiah, when the costs are, for example, in US dollar or dollar-related currencies. It's very important to have a diversified base of strategies investing in different related base currencies. When you have global equities, a big portion is in dollar-based.
Sorry, Dato, you have 1 more minute actually.
Okay, no problem. I'll skip into the next page. This is how we are expecting to work. You will see us, inshallah, over the next couple of years, coming out with more strategies along the same lines of what we had previously. I'll cover the next page very quickly, Ibu. So our expectations, of course, we have healthcare demand in investors, foreign investors, Asia-Pac equities, real estates, REITs and long-term investments, sukuk, ESG related. This is a big trend across investors, not just in Islamic, but also conventional, especially in the current environment. There's been a lot more interest in there. Global multi-assets, where a lot more dynamic, balanced funds. And of course, when we are all working from home, digital and robot advisory, cost being a factor, cheaper ways of investing there, and being able to do so remotely. So with that, Ibu Anustuti, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Dato' Paduka Syed, for the presentation. To complete the understanding of Islamic financial investments, such as equity and sukuk investment, I would like to invite the last speaker, Mr. Johari bin Ali Abdullah, to share your investment perspective for this market. Mr. Johari is the Chief Executive Officer in Aberdeen Standard Islamic Investment Malaysia Berhad. He was previously the Managing Director of Aberdeen Standard Investment Malaysia, which he joined in 2005. Shortly after which he helped to set up the company after it was awarded the first foreign-owned fund manager license under the government special scheme. Before joining Aberdeen Standard Investment, Mr. Johari was the Institutional Sales Director covering Asian equities at Kim Eng Securities in Singapore, HSBC James Capital in London, and BNP Paribas in London, the latter having sent him to set up the institutional broking operation of its associate, Mohayyani Securities Berhad in Malaysia in 1990. Mr. Johari graduated with the MA Honours degree in Land Economy from Pembroke College, Cambridge University. Without further ado, Mr. Johari, the time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and salam sejahtera to all listeners. I'd like to join my fellow guests, speakers in thanking Bank Indonesia and BPKH to invite me to speak here. And I thought I would just give an introduction to myself. My name's Jerry Ambrose, or Johari Ali Abdullah. I've been in Malaysia for 30 years, on and off. I became a Muslim, and alhamdulillah, in 1992. So my experience has really been in Malaysian capital markets throughout that time. I joined Aberdeen Standard Investments in 2005, and I wonder if I could just switch to my presentation, which I'll display selected slides from. Yes, Aberdeen Standard Investments is a Scottish fund management company that is listed on the London Stock Exchange. And if you move to the next slide, it just tells you a little bit about what we do. I won't go about the numbers too much, but we have quite a lot of assets under management. And we have decided to take one of two possible routes, and that is not to be a fund management boutique, but to be more of a supermarket for fund management. We found that our clients would want a variety of products, investing in a variety of regions, using a variety of strategies in order to meet their risk and return profiles. And that's what we've done. If we move on to the next slide, just shows you that our coverage is global. We have some 80 countries where our fund managers are exposed, and we have offices in some 40 of them. Could we move on 2 slides, please? And the next one. That pretty Catherine wheel basically shows that we invest in a multitude of products, starting with, well, from equities to fixed income and sukuk to real estate to private markets. We have a large quantitative strategy now, and a combination of them all through multi-asset strategies in order to meet the requirements of our clients who might want a mixture of all of it. But I suppose the burning question you must ask is how come a Scottish fund management company whose board of directors are were almost entirely Presbyterian Christians, how would they decide to enter Islamic fund management? Well, I think the real reason that it was quite easy for me to convince the board of directors to do so was that Aberdeen Standard Investments principles of investment, their investment process across all the asset classes that we have is very much aligned to the basic principles of Islam. So it wasn't a very difficult thing to do. I admit that I think Aberdeen Standard Investments has come to Islamic fund management in a different way than purely through Islam itself. But if we just look a bit more closely in the next slide at the basic tenets of Sharia compliant investment. I don't know if you can read that, but basically riba and the ban on interest. Well, we obviously in our conventional business have got investments in banks, non-Sharia banks, conventional banks. But when we do invest in these companies and when we do get involved in interest rates, it's got to be with a genuine purpose. We don't sort of muck around with highfalutin financial products that nobody really understands. Maisir or gambling, we're not really in the casino business, and we take the responsibilities to look after our stakeholders very seriously and make sure that it does them good and does society good at the same time. Gharar or uncertainty is something that we obviously want to avoid as well. And we want to make sure that the companies that we invest in are transparent and provide a clear sight into the assets that they manage. The whole process of profit and loss sharing that is involved in Sharia finance, altruism, cooperation, brotherhood, mutual respect, these are things that we've come to use as one of our main principles through maybe bitter experience rather than religious convictions. And that is that things that involve in other forms of investment don't tend to help our stakeholders and don't tend to make money. Similarly, although our conventional arm does invest in economic sectors such as alcohol, gambling, drugs and other activities, we have found that actually investing in most of these things don't help make money. They're not transparent enough. The asset-based principle, I think, is a tenet of our group's investment policy as well, and that we have to see that there is a tangible product that is throwing off cash and is able to provide long-term investment potential and not cloud anything out. So, and all our investments for Aberdeen Standard Islamic investments are overseen by our Sharia advisor. If I can go on to the next slide, it just basically demonstrates how, in fact, if assets were all managed along Sharia compliant lines, we would have avoided a lot of the problems of, for example, the global financial crisis. on the issue of riba, there has to be a social and ethical purpose beyond just pure return. And I think greed took over during the global financial crisis, and maybe it could be argued is going on right now in a number of markets and in a number of products. Maisir, or gambling, really, we still believe that the process of capital markets is basically to allocate capital for the benefit of society rather than just to make money. Gharar, or uncertainty, I think has led in the past to people having their principles misaligned. If you look at the bubble of the mortgage-backed security market and the whole housing bubble in the US, I think it was really because the mortgage brokers just wanted to get their commission on introducing new borrowers when they realized that the borrowers themselves weren't able to service any loans. Now, that wouldn't happen if you followed proper financial principles. I think that's really all I need to talk about in that slide. If you move on to the next slide and then the one after that, learnings from Malaysia. I just wanted to highlight, that we started in Malaysia with our fund management business along Sharia lines with Aberdeen Standard Islamic Investments Malaysia Sendiri Berhad. And a key factor that you need for success in fund management, I think, is that you have an amenable market, a large market where a large chunk of the population are Muslim and are interested and need a product that is Sharia compliant. And in Malaysia, some 61% of the population is Muslim. The percentage in Malaysia in terms of Muslim element is much higher, and the population is much higher. But I think that they have the same characteristics. You have to have an amenable government that's willing to fork out and sponsor and go to great lengths to set up the necessary ecosystem to have capital markets and to facilitate Sharia finance. That means that these markets have to be broad and they have to be liquid, and they have to be confidence that the products that people invest in are Sharia compliant across equities, sukuk, mortgages, loans of all types, takaful. And that's something that really started here in the 70s and is still growing today. But I think there have been leaps and bounds since the turn of this century. In terms of regulatory infrastructure, I think there's quite a lot of confidence amongst the ummah, amongst the rakyat here in Malaysia, that the products are genuine and Sharia compliant. You have to provide education, not just of the average household, which has been done in Malaysia about home economics, really, but basic training for capital markets, through to specialist training for specific areas of capital markets, and then tertiary education for research and innovation to take place. And then, the average Malaysian consumer, or the average consumer anywhere, has to be confident that they're able to invest maybe in small quantities without having too much taken away from them in the terms of fees, and that these products are transparent and easily available. I think that's something that the Malaysian government has a good job to do. It's not over yet, and you need to innovate products that might be common in the conventional markets and make life easier for people, but to make sure that, that their equivalent might be available through Sharia compliant products.
Mr. Johari, I'm sorry. Yeah, you have 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes, okay. The next slide just basically shows how Aberdeen Standard Investments' journey in Malaysia. We started here in 2005. We got our Islamic license in April 2009. We started to manage money, Sharia compliant money, not just in Malaysia, but all over the world in 2015. And it is remarkable how our investment process has adapted or dovetailed and aligns very well with the Sharia compliant management. We also manage money for retail and wholesale investors here, and we started launching unit trusts in 2013, the most successful of which is the World Equity Fund. And in 2017, we had this merger of Aberdeen Asset Management and Aberdeen Standard. Next slide, please. Looking at our assets under management, which look rather modest compared to that of Principal, we have a total of 15, just shy of 16 billion ringgit of assets under management in the Malaysian office, about 21% of which, or 3.4 billion, or some 840 million US dollars, is Sharia compliant. At the moment, it is all in equities. We have a significant fixed income and sukuk team regionally, and we have a team of 3 sukuk and fixed income analysts here in Malaysia, but as yet, we have yet to be awarded a pure sukuk mandate. Our equity capabilities in the next 2 slides amount to about 150 billion US dollars. And the basic principle that I've got a short amount of time to tell you about is that we believe that we need to look at quality in companies. We need to, and in order to do that, you have to have a lot of people on the ground visiting companies, all using the same process and debating with each other what the top picks are. So and we have embedded ESG, or environmental, social and governance analysis into all our companies, whether we're investing in equities, sukuk, even real estate, across all our products. And this is a key factor of our process. If you jump 2 slides on with the entitled quality, what we see as quality is the true value of a company, that it has a genuine transparency, that they have a competitive advantage, that we believe that the company will keep that competitive advantage and grow over the next minimum of 3 years, and that they have the balance sheet to fund it and ideally pay out dividends on top of that. And the key question is, once you've found that quality, is to buy it at a valuation that is below what you think is the right value, and sell it ideally at an obscenely higher valuation than what we think is fair value. And that's basically how our portfolios are formed. If you look at the next slide, it doesn't really say anything new, but it's key that we have environmental, social and governance assessment in all our business, all our investments. And that's not just to tick boxes, but I think it has been proven. I was in a conference yesterday organized by MSCI, which basically showed that the ESG indices have outperformed the normal conventional indices by a large margin, and that margin is widening as time goes on.
Mr. Johari, can you speed your presentation, please?
I think I will leave it at that, really, just to say that we are a bottom-up, long-term fund manager. We are supervised by our Sharia advisor, Amani Investors, headed up by Dato Daud, and we are audited every month and kept on the right path by Amani, and they work very closely with us, which has led us to scale up our Sharia compliant fund management across the world over a number of products. I think that's it, really. Thank you very much, Ibu Ana.
Thank you, Mr. Johari, for the presentation. I'm sorry for the time constraint, and also to all speakers for the insightful presentation. As the time is running, we will start with the Q&A. There are at least 4 questions on the chat room. 2 questions for Mr. Istiak, and 2 questions for Ibu Huria. The first question comes from Ibu Ira Widayati from Bank Indonesia. Mr. Istiak, as the development bank, how would you balance the funding needs and the finance side, given the project which you finance most likely affected by the pandemic situation? When financing a public sector project, how do you limit the risk that the project is not smoothly run? Kali elaborate ISDB issuance plan also in the near future. I think this is the next questions to ISDB with the similar tone from Bahrudin Setiawan. He's also concerned about how the ISDB facing in the era pandemic currently. Maybe you can start to answer, Mr. Istiak.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Once again, thank you very much for the questions. I think they're very relevant to the context that we are facing today. In terms of the ISDB, we have, as soon as the pandemic hit our member countries, we developed a very robust, flexible support package for all our member countries. We call it the Strategic Response and Preparedness Program, or SPRP. and it had a three-tiered set of interventions, which covers the emergency response, which is called the response track. We then have the short to medium term track, which covers the restore activities, and then we have the long term lending activities to restart the economy and the recovery process itself. So this was a $2.3 billion package that the ISDB made available through our board of directors to the member countries. And to date, these have targeted the medical support interventions like procuring the drugs, the medical equipment needed to cover the member country needs in terms of COVID-19, and also in terms of the livelihood recovery and economic support packages as well. So when we deal with our member country intervention, when it comes to the COVID-19 context, in order to mitigate the risks, we do, like we do for most of our projects, we do a lot of support activities to help them to design the best design of interventions and activities that can help them to reach the objective that they're setting. In terms of COVID-19, we've also set up a digital platform, a blockchain-based platform called the Global Coordination Platform, or the country platform, which allows the countries to directly purchase supplies and equipment from global vendors in a secure way. So this kind of facilitation environment helps the member countries to cater to the uncertainties caused by the COVID-19 pandemic on the project side as well. So I hope this answers both the first and the second question, because they were very similar.
Yeah.
Back
Thank
to you,
you,
Ivana.
Mr. Tia. The next question is for Ibu Huriyah, Bu. There are two questions coming from Dalia Wijayanti. The question is, as mentioned in presentation, Hajj management is based on two of them, is benefit and non-profit. Could you elaborate more how to have benefit but non-profit in the perspective of portfolio management? And the other questions coming from Bahrudin Setiawan. With such a large of growing Hajj fund every year, in order to increase the service given to the pilgrim, how will BPKH increase its investment while keeping it safe and protected from the effect of the pandemic, so it remains invested in the proper sectors? Please, Bu.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bu Anna. For the first one, the question from Dalia, how do we try to optimize the return to benefit, but at the same time not to have profit? So actually there are two elements to it. In general, of course, when we do investment, we would like to make benefit and we try to optimize the return. But you know, under the law number 34, we are non-profit organization. So the profit, whatever that we could generate from our investment, they all goes to the pilgrims. Depends on whether it is the Dawu or Dana Haji. For the Hajj fund, whatever that we generate from the investment of the Hajj fund or the placement of the Hajj fund, all the money are being distributed to the pilgrims, either to subsidize those who are going to perform the Hajj, and the balance, the remaining, are distributed among those who are in the wait. We have over 4.5 million people now waiting to go for the Hajj in Indonesia. So all money are being distributed. And the profit we generate from the investment and placement of Dana Abadi Umat, the People Perpetual Fund, actually utilized to the extent possible as per the law and the regulation to benefit the Indonesian Muslim people. So as you can see, of course, doing investment, doing placement, our aim is to make profit, but this profit are solely and entirely given to the people, to the Haji, to the pilgrims who are going and who are in the wait, and for the Indonesian Muslim people. So that's why we try to optimize the return. But as far as we are concerned, the people who are doing it, myself, one of the members of the executive board, and the rest of the executive board, as well as the people in the supervisory board, we are not getting even 1 cent out of this profit, because we are non-profit organization. So we cannot take the dividend. We cannot. There's no bonus for us either. Whatever we can take are already fixed by the prudential regulation. So that's to Lydia. As for Bahrudin Setiawan, the question how to increase the investment, how to try to optimize the return by doing it responsibly. I don't know whether this is a good thing or not, but the fact that Indonesia being a civil law country, everything has to be regulated by law, everything has to be laid down by regulation. So what are the mandates, what the authorities that we have in BPKH are already articulated very specifically in the law number 34 of year 2014. We cannot go beyond that. And the law has been further elaborated in the government regulation number 5 of year 2018. So even exactly where we can invest, what are the principles, these are all already laid down. And we have to strictly follow this. So this could be an advantage in the sense that everything, the parameters on how we do our investment and how we actually choose the portfolio and all those, the parameters are already set. And we went further. We have, I mentioned just now for the global investment, for example, how we choose our portfolio, what will be our focus. We are very much driven by the spirit of the law, of course, and it further laid down in the BPKH number 6 of year 2020 that set out clearly and in details what are the procedures and what are the forms of investment that we can choose, that we can explore. And this is in terms of the regulation, in terms of the, maybe you can call it the conditions and the terms that are applicable to us. But aside to this, we also have our structure internally that ensure governance, that ensure prudence, because this is the mandate of the law that we have to do it according to Sharia law, all the BPKH investment principle I mentioned in my presentation. So we do have our system that has been instilled in the BPKH itself. We have our risk management department, we have our legal department, we have our compliance department, and not only that, we do it at the executive board level where we do it properly, you know, like even from our side, we have to ensure that all the elements are fulfilled, and yet we still have to get the further analysis from the risk management, then the legal, etc., etc. And we go further. There is also the supervisory board who play the role that they actually study, they analyze every proposal for placement and for the investment. And when they feel it meets all the requirements that laid down by the law and the regulation, then only they will approve it. So that's basically the answer.
Thank you, Ibu Haria. Actually, there are some more questions coming, but since we are far beyond our schedule, I apologize for the participant who asked the question, but not get the answer for the from the speakers. Again, thank you very much for all the speakers. I really grateful that is really fruitful discussion. We have such a comprehensive information from all angles in Islamic investment perspective. And now we are reaching the end of this session. Again, thank you very much for Mr. Istiak Akbar, Dr. Huriah, Dato Paduka Syed, and Mr. Johari, and all participant brothers and sisters. May Allah bless us with the healthiness and stay safe. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I pass it back to Mbak Putri. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Assalamualaikum.
Assalamualaikum.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah alladzi hadana li hadza wa ma kunna linahtadiya laula an hadana Allah. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah al-khaliqul haqqul mubin wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh as-sadiqul wa'dul amin. Amma ba'du. Alhamdulillah, Amin. Your Excellencies, Hajj missions, distinguished speakers, brothers and sisters, representatives of various governments and institutions. Alhamdulillah, we have finally successfully organized the second International Hajj Conference. This conference is held as the part of 7 Indonesian Sharia Economic Festival organized by Bank Indonesia or Bank Indonesia, the Central Bank of Indonesia, and the Indonesian Hajj Fund Management Agency or BPKH. 16 panelists have presented their ideas in 4 intensive sessions within 2 days, covering the subject of the economy of Hajj, the global Hajj fund management, global outlook on the Islamic economics and finance, the Sharia compliant project portfolio management. The conference is well attended by more than 350 participants, including for Hajj mission, academia, and professional from government officials, multilateral development institutions, bankers, investment managers, and public. The Governor of Bank Indonesia, President of Islamic Development Bank, and Chairman of Hajj Mission were among the VVIP participants in this convention. The meeting was officially opened by Dr. Peri Warjio, the Governor of Central Bank Indonesia, and the keynote speech by Dr. Bandar Al-Hajjar, the President of Islamic Development Bank. On the opening, my brother, Dr. Islam Fauzi, the Chairman of BPKH's Professor Board, welcomed all delegates. The BPKH appreciates the effort made by Bank Indonesia to co-host the second International Hajj Conference. The International Hajj Conference meeting was held in the right time and in conjunction with 7 ISA meeting in Jakarta. In his keynote, Dr. Peri Warjio, Governor of Indonesia, pointing out the importance of international best practices in developing Sharia instrument and Islamic finance. During the past years, Indonesia has enhanced the development of Sharia in finance industry through the instrument of cash wakaf link sukuk or CWLS, green sukuk, and development of halal industry. Bank Indonesia also committed to support Islamic finance through the monetary policy and financial deepening by developing various Sharia instruments. In highlight for the professional international best practices, BPK as the Sharia institution should formulate clearly the investment policies, investment guidelines, and organization and HR competencies. In his remarks, Dr. Bandar Al-Hajjar, the President of Islamic Development Bank, highlighted the greater prudence in the management of Hajj funds with regards to the impact of pandemic. He also raised the importance of expanding cooperation with the non-traditional partners to sufficiently raise resources to reach the ambitious sustainable development goals. There are also huge and diversified investment opportunities in the Muslim world with a total of population of 1 billion and a total market size of US 7 trillion USD, which offers valuable opportunity for all Hajj funds to contribute to the development of Islamic countries. The session 1 of the conference has discussed the individual country experience in dealing with Hajj and Umrah, especially related with Hajj fund administration, investment management, and important role of the Hajj fund in Islamic economic and finance development. Dr. Anto Abimanyu, for example, in addition, explained the structure of Hajj fund institution. He also explores the challenges in finding the investment opportunity during the pandemic. Not only the COVID pandemic caused the economic recession and financial volatility, the daily physical activity is also extremely limited. Mr. Al-Haji Zikrullah Kani Hassan, Chairman of National Hajj Commission of Nigeria, explained this and best practices in Hajj management, the challenges and highlight opportunities. He recommends the Hajj fund management strengthen cooperation to enhance the best practice implementation and explore investment opportunities. Haji Osman bin Haji Muhammad Jair of Tabung Amanah Islam Brunei or Taib, which has a long history since 1990s, has able to set up complex structure of managing Hajj within the spectrum of banking sector, capital market, insurance business, as well as alternative investment covering properties and private equity. He also explained how Taib has established a holding company to manage similar line of business streamlining the business organization, and improving the efficiency business management. Datuk Nik Muhammad Hasuddin Yusof of Tabung Haji shown how each institution could be contributed to increase the Hajj fund management efficiency from organization structure and strategic building blocks. All these experiences, especially from Taib and Tabung Haji, could become an accelerant for new entity established such as BPKH. Broader new entity established such broader cooperation with other multilateral institutions such as ISDB and commercial institutions could be synergy with Hajj fund management in order to improve service for the pilgrims or Hujjaj, risk-adjusted return for the fund under management, and broader mission for the Islamic economy and finance development. The session 2 of the conference discussed about the economy of Hajj and impact of the pandemic. Muhammad Hadi Mejai, Director of Investment, highlighted how the Hajj host country was able to overcome many of the challenges posed by the enormous task of hosting more than 2 million people every year within the narrow time frame and facilitating their stay and their performance of this most holy ritual. Furthermore, he highlighted that the increased use of fintech may be one area which can be capitalized on to further improve the service offering. Prof. Dr. Azmi Umar from INSAFE highlighted that revenue from KSA from Hajj and Umrah in 2019 stood at 12 billion, or around 7% of KSA total GDP, and 20% of its non-oil GDP. While the cost to perform Hajj and Umrah has increased every year for more than 5%. To make significant impact to the Islamic economy, we should enhance the halal economy, and one of them could be driven from Hajj and Umrah activities, as the huge amount of money spent every year. It is also recommended that the countries with significant pilgrim should consider setting up Hajj fund body to manage the funds such as Tabung Haji, BPKH, Brunei Taib, Maldives Hajj Corporation, and so on. But the Muslim Total from World Hajj and Umrah Convention pointed out the Hajj now under pandemic condition and economic impact. The COVID-19 pandemic has significantly changed the Hajj 2020 process. The number of pilgrims for only 240,000 people with estimated potential revenue of $1.6 billion is decreased from around 10.5 billion in previous years. The total loss as economic impact of the pandemic was around 587 million USD for travel agencies, 1.6 billion for the airlines, and 8 to 6 million for government taxes and fees. Professor Said Latki identifies the main players in the Hajj business, which are the pilgrims, business suppliers, government, and community residents. The main spending of Hajj costs remains exposed to transportation, accommodation, and food. The halal industry has followed the Hajj activities with a significant potential economic impact, generated around 150 billion in income and create up to more than 100,000 jobs. In summary, how we can win the benefit of Hajj, not only for the KSA, but also for the domestic economy. In addition, if the pandemic continues to prolong, the parties involved in the Hajj ecosystem should find new business model to sustain the business in Hajj and Umrah. The session 4 of the conference discussed about outlook on Islamic economic finance and impact and mitigation of COVID-19. Mr. James Walsh, IMF President Representative Jakarta Office, explained that the economic recovery as the impact of COVID-19 is likely to be slow. The coronavirus cases continue to rise. Unsettling financial market and growth expectation, inflation rate fell, especially in the advanced economies during lockdowns, but has now begun to go back to normal levels. The economic outlook for 2021 expect that the growth should recover and inflation should remain under control, while bringing the deficit back to target will be a challenge. Given social needs, improving revenue collection is important. Then, Brother Riza TIAS, Economic and Monetary Policy Department, Bank Indonesia, pointed out the impact of COVID-19 to the economy. After struggling in the last 2 quarters, the economic recovery is proceeding as expected. The domestic economy is gradually recovering, primarily driven by fiscal stimuli and stronger export. To mitigate COVID-19, Bank Indonesia continues to strengthen its policy mix. Sister Dwi Irianti Hadiningdia, Director of Islamic Financing, Minister of Finance, emphasized the National Development Financing through Sukuk Negara. As of July 2020, total asset of Indonesia Islamic finance has reached 1.639 trillion or 111.86 billion dollars, around 9.68 market share. Total issuance of Sukuk Negara from 2008 until October 2020 has reached IDR 1.553 trillion, with the distribution of 2,939 projects throughout Indonesia, which include road, bridge, water resources, education, religious, and etc. The government also continues to innovate the Sukuk model, that is cash wakaf linked Sukuk, retail Sukuk, project Sukuk, and green Sukuk. Mr. Ali Taufik, SBC Mina, highlighted the development of Sukuk as one of the Islamic instruments shows significant progress. This is a positive indication that Sukuk can be used as an alternative of a form of financing. The volume of global Sukuk issuance grew with the first with average of 21% CAGR during 2002 until 2019. The global Sukuk issuance in 2020 has achieved 26 billion versus 29 billion in 2019. So foreign and supranational issuers dominate the supply, accounting on average for 47% of the total supply during 2001 until 2020 year to date. The season 4 of the conference discussed about Sharia compliant project portfolio management with the point of view from ISDB, BPKH, and asset managers. Mr. Muhammad Istiak Akbar from SDB highlighted the ISDB has engaged in the portfolio management practices with the main sectors in agriculture, education, transportation, and energy. While during the experiences, it also faces challenges. Among them are communication and coordination, response time, land acquisition, and safeguard. And the pandemic let me repeat. Okay, the key point from SDB to mitigate those challenges are to manage a strong role in implementation support and oversight, to focus on building the local capacity, to adjust and adapt the COVID-19 environment and varieties, and stronger support and responsiveness within the COVID-19 context. Then, the colleague Dr. Ria Islami explained that the PKH has the institution that manages hedge fund over 139 trillion allowed by regulation to invest in many product or instruments that follow Sharia compliance. Nowadays, the PKH is starting to enhance its investment through various instruments, not only in Hajj-related investment, it proposes to diversify its portfolio to enhance the yield, strategy investment, and as a part of natural hedging. Then, Brother Mas Sapudin or Dato Padukasyat, right? Principal asset management emphasized that in Malaysia, pension fund play a key role to accelerate the Islamic finance segment with Sharia compliant mandates, which could replicate by Indonesia to further enhance the financial deepening of Sharia finance. And last but not least, Brother Johari bin Ali Abdullah from Aberdeen, Malaysia, underlined that the main keys for developing and thriving Islamic fund management business are a scalable target market and amenable government willing to establish and help to fund the necessary ecosystem. This includes providing regulatory infrastructure, accessibility to Islamic products for all, and willingness or ability to innovate. In closing, we are facing the inconvenient truth that the COVID-19 pandemic affects all aspects of our life, and we cannot deny that the financial sector is one of the worst hit, including the Islamic financial industry. However, I believe that there is a sound optimism in Hajj and Umrah industry services. In recent years, the Islamic financial industry is witnessing a remarkable development, which include the development of Shariah instruments. Through the development of Islamic finance, it is expected that we can achieve socio-economic justice and well-being among all society. The aim of this International Hajj Conference is focused on the financial issues and investment opportunity in Hajj and Umrah industry. To achieve those aims, we need to work together. Hajj mission, government, private operators, investors, academia, and Hajj and Umrah stakeholders to take accountability, action, and promoting some innovative and creative problem solving. It is important then that all countries participate and cooperate because it adds more perspective and enrich the information. Hopefully, in the future, the Hajj and Umrah ecosystem could contribute further to the development of Sharia finance in Indonesia and globally. Finally, thank you so much for this opportunity to share the brief conclusion of this conference. On behalf of the BPKH, I would like to express my appreciation to all participants for taking time out of your busy duties and time to attend and participate in this conference. May Allah always give the full protection and barakah to us and Muslims around the world. Fastabil khairat, nasr minallah wa fatun qarib, insyaAllah. Billahi taufiq wa hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Distinguished ladies, participants, I would like to thank you for your participation in our virtual event. We also remind that participants will also obtain 2 electronic certificates or e-certificates placed on the following following virtual online stream. Now, let us start the hearing and the unit card. This is ladies and gentlemen,